So we'll call the meeting to order at 6:02. We have a minute taker and we'll do our best with time tonight. The first thing on the agenda is an executive session. It's a student matter, so we're gonna do that first to get it out of the way so that the family can continue on their day. So the executive session is under T1 VSA 313A7 for student and academic record suspension or discipline. And I just need a motion to enter. So moved, Kathy, and a second from Melissa.
And invite Shannon and I.
And we'll need to invite Shannon and Patrick into the meeting with us. All those in favor of entering executive and inviting Patrick and Shannon, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay.
Sorry, what's Shannon's last name?
Warden. So we will move spaces
Mhm.
and then we'll come back into this room. Okay. For board members online, we'll get you into a breakout room. All right, so thanks everybody for hanging in there. So the next thing on our agenda is public comments, and before we dive into public comment, I just wanted to send a thank you out to our community members for answering our survey, for coming to all of our in-person events that we've had over the past couple of days, helping us understand priorities and issues and visions for the future. And I think one thing that sort of struck me is we sort of owe ourselves this acknowledgement of hurt. I know I've been really personally affected by all the stories I've collected, all the people I've interacted with, from administration to staff to kids, all the survey responses I reviewed, all the notes that we've put together. I just really wanted to formally acknowledge the suffering that we're doing. And as humans, we work really hard to stay comfortable because being uncomfortable is really awful and it's negatively charged in our system. And we attend to that, so it's fixed, right? But if we can collectively agree, there's been a lot of issues, a lot of hurt, frustration, anger, disappointment, right? If we can agree that everyone here, online, in person, all over the place, are all affected in some way and harbor some of that, then so one step closer to that uncomfortable feeling, losing power in our current situation. And so even in these chaotic moments, there's a proclivity for order, right? We want things to be repetitive and patterned and organized and interconnected. And all this depends on these really constant feedback loops. So one thing that really matters is that the outcome of the change we're hoping to see is dependent on where we start. And if we're starting from a really contentious place, it's hard to move in a positive direction. So despite feeling vulnerable and uncomfortable and shaky at the moment, I know we're working towards building sustainable relationships. And I hope that everyone in the audience, online and here in person, will see that we're demonstrating our patterns, that we're following through with our organization, that we're fostering our interconnectedness, and we're really relying on our feedback loops in all forms. So we're grateful for your presence and helping us bridge a gap. And we hope this is a beginning of a really powerful relationship. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk. And so for this public comment section, I hadn't really asked the board yet, but we did allot 30 minutes of time twice in our agenda for public comment. And I'm not sure how you guys want to structure that, whether we're just absorbing or if we are question and answering. How do people feel about those public comment sections tonight?
I like moving towards being able to respond to people. Having heard recently, we look like bumps on a log.
Other people for tonight? I know I'm sort of throwing it at you, so.
I'm in agreement with the way we normally operate. With the caveat that I think we do need to include on a regular basis more Q&A sessions, or that's what we're focused on. I think this is an opportunity tonight as a sort of a special meeting in a way to take advantage of that. I don't know how the meetings went in the other towns, whether it was just listening or whether there was some Q&A involved. So this could be just an extension of that, as far as I'm concerned.
That's sort of what I was envisioning.
Yeah.
Is that-
Yeah.
Are people comfortable with that? Okay, so we're gonna allot 30 minutes and I'm gonna try to stick to that pretty closely because we have a lot of other stuff to dig into tonight. So I'll open the floor for public comment. We'll stick to 30 minutes. Just a reminder, anyone speaking, it's a 3-minute limit and I am timing. Sorry to be hard nosed, but
Somebody else to time, Erin, so you can.
it's all good. Okay, I'll open the floor and I saw Courtney on Zoom.
Hi, I just wanted to thank you again for doing the meetings last night in the towns, and today in New Haven, and I know, was it Starksboro's coming up? I was really surprised at the lack of turnout for them, but really happy with the folks that showed up and very impressed with you board members, making the time and taking the time and really trying to answer our questions and taking notes and bringing them back to the rest of the board as a whole. I wanted to ask, since all of you are there, and I saw again today that there were new positions listed on the MAUSD website, but still none of them are teacher positions. And I know that I had asked this last night, but seeing that more positions were posted today, mostly for anticipated openings at Mount Abe, coaches and things like that, but none of the current vacant, well, not current, but upcoming vacant teacher positions at BES. And I was just wondering why there's no positions listed. Again, if it's because you have to wait for the budget to pass or if there's another underlying reason. But all the positions that are listed, with the exception of like 2, are for Mount Abe. There's nothing for Moncton or Starksboro, New Haven, or Bristol. So that was just my question, just because I was following up from last night. But again, thank you so much for putting the time and energy and effort into putting those meetings out there last night and really helping the community understand where you guys are coming from and listening to where everybody else is coming from. I really appreciate it.
I don't know if we have an answer for the positions at the moment.
Yeah, I can speak just sort of broadly because there's a sort of a, it's on a case by case basis. There are some positions that we have to fill. Sometimes to be compliant with meeting students' needs that are written into plans. Sometimes it's more about being consistent with our staffing rules. And there are other positions that we're choosing to not fill until we know we have a budget. So that if we have to continue to reduce and continue to reduce, then we have some attrition that we can still take advantage of to get to whatever the budget target is that ultimately passes. So just on a case by case basis, making decisions about what do we post for and what do we kind of sit on until we have a budget.
Sarah on Zoom.
Well, Courtney and I are clearly on the same wavelength. I took advantage of that long executive session to really formulate my thinking, and it's almost, it's pretty darn close, Courtney, but I'm still gonna say what I wanted to say if you don't mind. And so again, I too really want to thank the board for taking time to gather feedback from constituents through the online survey, through the in-person engagement meetings that you had at each town. Thank you for doing that before establishing budget priorities before the next vote. So I'll back up a little bit. It was a huge relief to many district employees earlier this month when our superintendent found an additional $575,000 in savings that would allow previously laid off employees to remain in our district. A good portion of those savings was the result of people either retiring or leaving the district to pursue other opportunities. But that feeling of elation, it didn't take long for me to realize, but wait a minute, we aren't yet hiring replacements for the people who are leaving. For example, my longtime colleague in the 4th grade at Bristol, Kathy Smith, will be retiring soon. We haven't started to hire her replacement. Not that she can ever be replaced. So much of the savings, I think a good chunk of that savings realized is due to fewer, will result in fewer people working with students if we don't start to fill them soon. Now, I totally get that it might make sense to some to put a freeze on hiring, given that we don't yet have a passed budget. But I too noticed the internal job listing that went out just this afternoon. It was posted this afternoon. The list didn't include any of the vacated classroom teacher positions, nor an interventionist, math interventionist, I think, at the middle or high school who works directly with students to support students who struggle in math. But it did include a director of facilities and grounds for the whole district. I don't dispute that many of the positions on that job posting are necessary to begin the school year, as Patrick alluded to. For example, we will need middle school soccer coaches. We will need a varsity boys soccer coach. That's a priority for me, certainly, and many. We will need more special educators. We don't have enough special ed teachers as it is. So we've got some unfilled positions. And we also desperately need custodians. So I don't fault anyone for trying to fill these much needed jobs. But please, if you do plan to fill those positions, especially the administrative facilities director position, please start hiring classroom teachers as well. We want the best candidates possible for these jobs. We can't afford to wait. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Any other public comment in the room or online?
Hi, everyone. Shauna from Bristol, since you don't know me. Thank you guys very much for last night and all the engagement that I've seen from board and from the individuals that have shown up. But I really was hoping that more people would show up, so I'm definitely a little bit bummed, honestly, because I was hoping to see like everybody, and that's what even I've heard is just, we need more people to show up and speak about it. And one thing that I would ask from both the board and the public is that if you have questions, I guarantee other people have those questions. So just post it publicly in Front Porch Forum. Ask for responses to be on Front Porch Forum. Something so that we don't have to keep bugging board members for the same questions everybody's asking. That's a big one. Post it on the website so that we can see those frequently asked questions. And we're not alone. I think we've heard a lot of people say that there is a lot of hurt, like what Aaron said. But we don't have to suffer alone. There are community members that are all going through the same things, and just being able to support each other, both as a community and supporting our schools and our board. We don't need to feel so alone, because we're not. But if we're not going to ask for help, then you're not going to get any help. An important part of the process is actually telling someone that there's an issue. You can't talk about, oh, well, this isn't happening, when you didn't actually even ask anybody. You first have to go to the person that you have the issue with. Then you go follow the chain of command. And then if that's not working, you just keep going and you speak up. If you don't talk about it, then nobody's going to know. And then these things keep happening. And looking over past board minutes for years, I've seen way too many board minutes, but we're asking the same questions that we've been asking every year. We've asked these same questions. So having the follow-up to make sure that these questions are being answered. And historically, it's just because you don't have the back and forth during the meeting, it's the question gets asked and then followed up privately or followed up separately. But we shouldn't continue to just ask the same questions. We should be able to ask it and have the answer available. So I really am glad that you guys are trying to do like a back and forth tonight at least, because I do think that would help. But I just believe that there needs to be a better process for the follow-up for questions as far as requests for inclusion on the board agenda or anything, because it's, it seems like things get lost really easily, and obviously you have a lot to do, but I ask you guys as the board members to be sure to be accountable and transparent. And the same with the administration, but also as a community, if you don't speak up, then you can't complain later that nobody helped. You have to speak up. And if you're not willing to come here or go to the meetings or fill out the survey, then you don't have any right to be mad later when you didn't have the outcome that you wanted. I mean, we all have to be here together. So start showing up. Because, yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And just to sort of comment on that, so we are developing a frequently asked questions form. It's on my growing to-do list. And it is something that we've heard, right, that it's important that people don't have to dig through stuff, that they can go to one spot and find it, or if they have to dig, then that doesn't feel like it's transparent, right? So that is something we've dedicated to. Part of the reason why we're engaging with the community so much is to get more of that sort of underlying stuff about what are the barriers. And then systematically breaking those down, right, so that we can be more effective. Because it's just as much of a lift on this end as it feels on other ends, so. It's my second full-time job.
I mean, third.
Third, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
What are those? Okay, any other public comment at this time? No? Yeah.
I do, it's Alan Whitner. It's gonna be my 3 minutes.
Yeah, time's rolling.
Okay. I'd like to know if you were happy. If you don't report to the public, nobody else is. Cause it's sad when we don't get it. Look at the people online, look at the people that come to the votes. So it's a thankless job, but I wonder if we could change it. I sent all of you a quick email that lines out every budget, that's every part of the budget, like over $1 million. There should be some accountability. So this budget is the sewing shop in home ec. We have 4 teachers. We need 8 new sewing machines, and we need this and that, and it should be open to the public. So once you do that, then you have the whole idea. This is what the budget is. I think I would like to know, and I started looking today, we have a little over, what was it? 1,100 students or whatever, don't close to 1,200. How does this budget compare? And this is a hard question to answer, to other budgets around the state. The state education department has the largest accounting company in the state. They should be able to help us get this information to the public, and it's not getting out. I get angry when I hear people even now gonna vote the budget down. I don't want to see that. I commented on Patrick's office too. Well, we don't need a central office. So, okay. I would like to see the figures, not that we're gonna cut the teachers. If we have $10 million for teachers, we have 20 elementary teachers, we got 100 at Mount Abe, whatever it is. And it should be, I don't know if it should be done by school, because that gets a little sensitive. But you need to get this information out. And I don't know I'm not telling you anymore, but it needs to come out with the costs. And that becomes an expensive job for people to put this together too. So maybe you need volunteers to help. I don't know if, anyways, okay, so I want to see costs. I want to see how many students at Mount Abe, how many teachers, what are the number of special ed teachers there? How is that paid for? then we have another thing there and nobody looks at, it's over 1.6 million. It's the other,
Can you
the students that nobody talks about because of the confidentiality of the students. So, but we need to do something. And if we don't do something, I don't wanna see the budget voted down.
Well,
It's bad for the community. The schools in this 5 communities are the heartbeat of the town.
hopefully
So-
some of that will be answered tonight for you.
What?
Alan. Hopefully some of that will be answered for you tonight as we walk through the rest of our agenda.
Okay,
So-
I'm done. Is
Yep.
that what you mean?
Yeah.
Uh,
Glad you could read through that. I'm really horrible at being direct.
Thanks,
Alan.
Thank you.
All right. Any other public comment before we move on? We'll have another one at the end. Okay. I'm gonna close this public comment section then, as I don't see other people popping up right now, but we do have another one at the end of the agenda. The next item is an action to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Daniela,
Or
Barb seconds. All those in favor of approving the agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. The next item is a consent agenda. And we have 6 resignations on the consent agenda. I hope you've all had a chance to read those. And so we just need a motion to approve the consent agenda to accept those resignations.
So moved, Kathy.
Kathy,
seconded, Daniela.
all those in favor of approving the resignations on the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, the motion passes. The next item is our executive limitations monitoring, which is the discussion that includes the responses to board questions that Patrick and his admin team put together.
All right, now we'll share the screen. For folks to see. So Liz and Justin online, we're not gonna be able to see you, so, but I think if you raise your digital hand, maybe we'll see that, but if you're trying to get a question in. And we can't see you, you may just need to unmute and chime in, we'll try to pay attention as well. So. The vast majority, certainly the highest priority items that you had identified for responses were sent ahead of time on Friday. And then you got the last couple of pieces yesterday. So we're not gonna dive into deep presentations, and that would sort of defeat the point of having the information ahead of time, so. Whoever was sort of running point on the question that we provided responses for, will give you kind of an overview of the response. And then really turn it over to questions that you might have about the information that was shared, so that'll be sort of the structure that we'll be using.
A little process question. Are the questions themselves in this information going to be posted?
Yep, so he's listed them by question. So the first question that he's listed is
No,
our,
I'm talking about for the public.
It'll all be linked to the
Yeah, it'll all
minutes,
be linked.
because this will all be public.
Okay,
Any other process questions before we jump in?
Thank you for doing this, by the
Sure.
way.
great.
All right, Floyd's up first, he had item number 1.
Great.
We'll start with the general
General
buckets.
buckets. First I want to introduce Tammy Crossman. If you don't know Tammy, she is without a doubt one of the greatest stabilizer backbones of our financial office. I want you to think about this for a second. We're a $35 to $40 million company. When you have all of our grants involved in that, and we run it with one accountant. It's an awful lot of trust, awful lot of checks and balances that go into that, but this woman is spectacular. So Tammy agreed to be here tonight because she is 500 times faster at diving into the weeds than I am. So thank you, Tammy, for being here, and I'll turn time over to her as questions arise. If there are no questions, Tammy will leave with a smile on her face as soon as she can. So we specifically, I specifically used the Levinson structure. Mostly because going forward, that is the direction we're going.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that? That means
Sure.
nothing to some people sitting around this table. I
Probably
think, so.
means something a lot to me and not a lot to a lot of others. Nate Levinson was contracted with the district to go through our budget structure, break it out and set it up so that it was in a way that made it more applicable to buckets that are more easily understood. In the old traditional method, we would lump a lot of things in there together. And it worked great for Tammy and Floyd, but nobody else could stay with it. This allows us to really look at items, tab number 1, school-based teaching staff. It pretty much says everything, right? We're gonna talk about who's in the school based there as teaching staff, other schools based staff, special ed staff, and just going down through. So those buckets were really changed in how we view them, how we account for them, how we roll them up together. The downside to that is this year we did a dual structure, the traditional method and the Levinson method. If you haven't read the Levinson method, I'll point out the great thing that Nate said about Tammy. He has never in all of the school districts he's worked with found a better organized and ability to dive deeply into the weeds to discuss on the fly any of his questions. I get to take full credit of that, but seeing how Tammy's sitting here, I'm wise enough to give her all of the credit because she was spectacular in leading that piece that Nate came to publicly share about our system. So now moving into this. The summary page is pretty simple. Any questions on any of this generally?
Could you just list out the other school-based staff? That'd be like paraeducators.
Sure. So now if we slide down,
Okay.
so you're gonna see tab 1, detailed, tab 2, other school-based staff. Principals, assistant principals, admin assistants, early eds, library staff, nurse, ELL teacher, instructional coach, go ahead.
So what I'd like to see, well, listing it this way is great. I'd want to see the FTEs overlaid next to that. So like core teachers, in section 1, 6.2 million. How many teachers is that? What grades are they serving?
Sure.
So I think greater detail of, we have 5 first grade teachers, that's a 5.0 FTE to subset that bucket. So leaving, the Levinson structure makes sense. I think we need a little bit more detail to better
I think
understand this.
staffing is later in the presentation with you. So
Yeah, it's somewhere in there, but.
I hear you saying.
you want to see it together.
I tried to do that while sitting on my couch 4 hours into all this material on Saturday. I shouldn't have to be that, I shouldn't have to pull it from here and there to get the FTEs that tie to the 6.2 million. I want it together because I know you guys have it, right?
Sure.
Because that's how you budget. You budget by FTE. So that's what you just need to put it in one place that's easy, and then that's gonna help us support as a board, as the administration, to put that out for the public for the budget.
I
So
think,
kind of
I
like
think it's
that.
important to recognize, one, your financial acumen is different than the general public. So we
Agreed.
tried to keep the big buckets to a little bit tighter bucket. And then we could go into the 1,700 lines, right? Which is kind of what you're talking about. And then within that, the other 350 staff people and bring them direct to any one of these positions. To do that on the fly right now,
Yeah, no,
we're not gonna be able to.
right.
But to tie what Patrick's gonna share later. And for me to then tie that back, when I say me, I mean Tammy. And to tie that back to these particular lines wouldn't be a big lift for us. It
Right.
won't be fast, given everything else we have on our plate. But it is something we can do, and certainly something that would be easy to generate going forward as part of the budget build, right?
Yeah, I think it just gives the board, the community, the full picture of what we're spending, but then on how many,
Sure.
to better understand the whole picture.
So 2 things. I have a couple of extra packets of everything that we're talking about tonight for those that like pen, paper and notes and all that stuff. So let me know if you want them right here. The other thing, one of the challenges that we face with that question, with any one of the things we're gonna be talking about tonight, there are a dozen different ways we could look at it and different ways you can combine various pieces of information. So knowing and what you're looking for may be different than what somebody else is looking for. So finding that exact right combination of layers and how deep into the weeds to go is something we wrestle with all the time.
Yeah, and I hear that totally, because I'm gonna look at it different than Alan's gonna look
Right.
at it, right? But at the end of the day, what we heard in Bristol yesterday was money on our student facing population, right? And get the people in the door. So for me, being able to pair the number of people supporting our children with the dollars is gonna be really important for me as we look at this next budget iteration. And without being able to do that, I don't feel like I'm able to say to my community, we did put that first. At least right now, like, we have a lot to get through, but just looking just at this one slide. Sorry.
And I see those combined, but also purposefully separated, right? If we need 9.7 teachers, but we tie it to, let's say in this one school, there are more experienced teachers, so their cost per FTE is substantially higher. It leads us into something that Nate in his structure tried to pull us away from, and that is cost per school.
What I'm looking at per school, I was looking.
Well, but if you're, but I understand what you're saying, but I'm trying to get you to what happens next. And that is, if we lump teachers at Bristol together and they're a very experienced group, for example, their cost to teach in that school is escalated versus another school that might be greener. So now you have a cost per student differentiation between these two schools that is just driven on length of experience of our teammate. So then our cost per student at a Beeman versus a Bristol changes. I'll use Lincoln as an example. Lincoln, because of a very high amount of experienced teachers, drove a very high per student cost. That very high per student cost created community friction. That friction led Lincoln to say, well, we can do this on our own. We don't need all of this. And was part of the reason why separation happened, because Lincoln felt that the other towns were saying, we're spending all this money to support your school. When in reality, every school should have a librarian. The fact that one's been with us for 30 years and one's been with us for 2 years, and the union structure makes one substantially more expensive, when added to the matrix, creates friction points that are unintended consequences of that type of a comparison. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying recognize the door that gets opened when we do that,
So-
because we have done it.
So I think maybe then I wasn't super clear, like, I didn't picture doing that by school. I was thinking, like, we have core teachers, and we know we have 10 fifth grade teachers across the district. We
Then I
have a
retract
line-
what I said.
That we have a
Sorry.
line for fifth grade teachers and we have the dollar amount associated with it.
No,
don't think we need to
that's a
bifurcate by
complete, what
school.
I heard you say
Yeah.
was
So
those
let me
teachers
know
at
clear.
Bristol.
Yeah, I don't wanna necessarily get to that granular level, because I think it's a little, I don't know, harder to maintain, but I think being able to look at it holistically as a district for all four towns.
I would agree 100% with that. I thought we were going in a different direction.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm hearing you say is that there are many different ways we can display the data, and something that I think we heard in our different groups over the past few days is that we can also help interpret and summarize some of those community requests. I mean, there are like a gazillion different ways community members want to see things, but we can at least like grab the big three and bring that back if that's helpful.
Sure.
I think what you're saying is the same thing we heard.
I need to just add that in Moncton, there was a request to pull out the information. What's spent on Moncton schools, so just say,
Not information we don't have,
Yeah.
and it's fraught with peril.
Yeah.
yeah. I hear you, I heard everything you said, but just so that you all know.
Well, and I agree with you. It does have its ups and its downsides, but what we heard loud and clear was that there's an innate distrust of how this district is using taxpayers' monies. And if we're not transparent, then we are not ever going to rebuild the trust that we have lost in the last few years. And if it means adding more numbers when they were asked for it, then we need to be very clear about providing those numbers.
And to your point, Daniela, we can slice and dice this any way you'd like. I have in front of me right now the cost per school. And how it's allocated based on students and how it's allocated based on the total part of the budget.
And I think that's what the taxpayers are asking for. And that we're consistent in moving forward with however many budget votes, and let's hope it's only one more for this year, that information is out there and it's available. And the request in New Haven was to bring you along. That you be the one to present the next budget.
I'll share that I have consistently offered to do that, and anytime I have been in an environment, there have been limited to zero participation. So now that we have an engaged community, I'm all in. I got somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
But I think Kathy, your point is well taken, and the challenge still exists in terms of when they're saying, when people ask for that information, how we define that, how you take all the information you're hearing and describe to us, what is that you want us to bring? We can bring whatever that is, but we need to know from you, what is it?
That is what we're distilling.
That's why we're here tonight. Yeah.
You get a comparison of teachers too, because one school, if this is the case, has 2 5th-grade teachers, and they're both new teachers. Then you go to the other school and you have 2 teachers with big experience and big cost. Does that become a budget thing for the voters? So if they knew that?
We have talked about that in terms of, rather than the true dollar amount per school, take that core teacher, divide it by our total staff, and use that number as a placeholder, so that it's not punitive in the public optic to have a very experienced team. And it's all of it's doable, none of it's really difficult. It's just, to your point, how many different slices and dices do we have? And do we just create something with a great pivot table in it that allows people to go in and put it together any way they want?
Yes.
Yeah, that's,
It's probably not a bad idea.
It's probably not a bad idea.
Can you define additional compensation in all of these salary-based buckets?
Sure. Oftentimes it's stipends.
Oftentimes.
There's no compensation that would be structured for above and beyond. There's no compensation that is performance-based. It's all additional compensation for additional duties that are taken on, nurse delegate, substitute on top of your core teaching piece. I know that would be in the substitute. I think we found it that way. A lot of it's that teacher leader.
Teacher leader, the high need stipend would be support staff as
Well,
well.
that would be in the next one of the other school-based for.
Some people are asked to sort of do their job for additional days in a year. And that gets paid on a per diem basis,
Per
so
diem,
that would
yeah,
probably
for the
go in
summer.
this additional compensation line.
So per diem stipends, those are 2 things that I heard.
Sure.
Okay.
Anything else? Yeah, Tammy, just jump in when you,
The health bio.
health buyouts.
Got it?
Yeah.
Yep.
One of the things that I struggle with is just going through this line by line. Some of it will have interests and much of it will have none. I love reacting to questions and just let's dive in as deep as you'd like. Any other questions on that first one?
Non-core teacher would be. A core teacher was a core teacher versus a non-core teacher.
Art teacher and music teacher.
Art teacher, music teacher.
so special.
Elective.
Core versus non-core? How do we break that? Think of
Math, something else.
Is
Social studies.
school-based teaching staff, is metalwork a core? Is some of the shop items a core class? No, it's more outside of. Is PE a core? No.
So the
I think
cores
it-
would be like science, math, reading, whatever, and then.
And then
everything else
the
is-
elementary
And elementary staff,
staff,
Okay.
and then everything
Classroom
else is the non.
sure.
I know what, I just have a really, really great suggestion that I think would help answer a lot of people's questions, and I know we're not supposed to talk right now, but I was wondering if I could please give a suggestion that would help answer. And something that would be helpful for people to see.
I'm just getting thumbs from the board about, because it's this process, so I just want to make sure everyone's feeling like that's something we'd like to hear. Anyone object?
Can we put like a time limit on
Yeah,
it?
it's. What I've heard from people and what I know would be helpful is that, because we're currently asking, what do these things mean? Seeing what Nate Levinson has suggested, is what do you put in these categories? Like, there's obviously a guide that's helped them to put things in different categories. If we could actually, the public, see that document that tells them the instructions on how to categorize things. But even better would be, what is the chart of accounts numbers that these expenses are allocated to? Because anyone that is going to look at the secondary documentation, we can see, what does additional compensation actually mean on the budget detail? What does paraprofessional mean? Because all these lead to account numbers. So the instructions would be helpful.
I think at least at a minimum, those two categories could have some parentheses with some basic description.
It's funny, as I struggled with Levinson versus traditional,
I know you had the descriptors in the traditional.
Yeah.
But I think this one
we can do the same.
could even be in the line that you've written here.
Sure.
It doesn't even need to be an extra line, I don't think.
Well, and this is where I was going, do we have, core teacher, 6193408, and then underneath you list first grade teachers, second grade teachers, and break that 6.1 down into the buckets, and it sums up to so that way you're seeing how many teachers and the FTE complement with that.
Would it
I don't
have
know
to
if
be
it's gonna
divided by
granular.
grade, or
I don't know. I mean, I'm open. I'm just
Like-
throwing out ideas.
could it be like K6?
Yeah.
And like 7-12, or break it down?
So my answer is any of those things are possible.
Mhm.
All of those things are not. Right? It becomes a question of if you'd like to see it this way and you'd like to see it this way and this way and this way and this way and this way. And we have 13 individual budget structures.
Yeah.
I'm reminding you that we have Floyd and Tammy.
No, I don't think that's what we're suggesting. I think we're just spitballing
Sure.
what direction do we go in with the one?
I'm all in, but I just want to give a sense of, let's discuss this with an eye towards what's effective and efficient. Because we can do an awful lot, but we really can't do it all.
Average cost per teacher.
And we'd like to sort of have this as the main way we're transparent about the budget iteration that's coming out. So what is even feasible, right?
Aren't there really two pieces? One is the piece of the board needs to dive in and understand, kind of your note earlier
Right.
today, Ashley, about budget 101. Let me just get in here and swim through this and get a better understanding. And then there's the public facing side.
Yeah.
That generally speaking, in my time here, I've had 3 individuals ask for the line items. All 1,700 lines. 3 people have had an interest. 2 were freedom of informations. One of the freedom of informations dove into it and has really done a great job understanding it. The other one looked at it and said, this is way too much work. I can't do it.
I think one of the comments that came after our meeting last night, I had a parent message me privately, and she said, if you bring one thing back, can you just tell them to dumb down the budget so we can understand it? And like, I think this does that to some extent. It makes it far more.
Well, and that really highlights the challenge, right? So hearing that and then hearing an idea of drop downs for every one of those.
Pivot
they're
tables
polar
within it, yeah.
opposite So we just need to figure out what's
If
the,
there's a happy balance.
yeah, right.
And who's the audience?
I don't know if I have to like make a motion for myself, be like, I have to go pick up my kiddo from my neighbor and I'll be hopping on Zoom, but I'm gonna be out for about 15 minutes. Okay, realistically longer than that,
See you in a
but
minute.
I'm trying not to, trying to be true.
So, okay, so
We're gonna go over all the really interesting stuff.
Make all decisions.
all right, so we're walking through these general buckets, so we've got,
So we've moved all the way from one, we haven't gotten out of there yet.
yep,
Are we in two now?
We talked about two a little bit already.
We have.
So what, it says other school-based staff, but then universal pre-K tuition is in there?
So think of that as a pass-through. Right? So one of the state structures is universal pre-K.
Right.
We pay for how many hours?
Like 160.
10 hours,
10
right,
hours.
10 hours we pay for, and that is a pass-through expense. We have to count it as an expense because we're paying that out to little Floyd's daycare center or whatever it might be. The Lincoln Cooperative Preschool, all of those preschools are receiving payment, and we're the conduit for that structure.
We have money coming in to offset.
Yeah,
We do.
It's a
yeah.
revenue.
So it's a revenue in, expense out.
Yeah.
That's an important question. Thank you.
An instructional coach is a separate position, or is it a position within the teaching positions where they've assumed more responsibilities? I guess I don't know what the role of instructional coach is.
It's a position covered by the collective bargaining agreement for professional staff, licensed staff. So same contract that teachers are on.
But what does
But they're
it,
not-
what does the job?
But they're not having separate teaching notes.
Katrina's gonna go deep into the job of the instructional coach in her section. So if you want to wait for that part,
Okay.
we can go deep there.
Feeling like I should have been last. It would have been fast. Anything else in there popping up that creates a question? Let's go to 3. So special ed staff, we received a block grant from the state. It's nowhere near $6.3 million. And what we do have is offsetting revenue that kind of works like this. Once the district has spent $66,000 on an individual, beyond that, we can be reimbursed at up to 95%. So a lot of these expenses are offset with revenue. But it's important to note some of those ones that are stomping right out at you. Alan talked about 1.6 million for special ed. That's 1.6 million in the out-of-district placements. We have a student right now that's heading to North Carolina and $45,000 a month.
They're related services for 1.4 million. What does that mean?
So I think that's OT, PT. Beth could probably articulate more clearly related services.
Not
Beth.
somebody abbreviation.
FLPs, occupational therapists, speech language pathologists, physical therapists.
Before we get to the, any other questions in 3? Before we get to 4, because there was a question around superintendent's salary a bit ago about how he makes way more money than the governor. All of these numbers, one of the advantages of working with Nate and in this structure is it rolled the benefits in as part of the expense. So it's not a separate line like it was in the old traditional. So these numbers, a special ed teacher is all in for all of their benefits. Remembering that a family medical insurance is 40 grand.
What's roughly your benefits as a percentage of salaries? 20, 25, 30?
Depends. Some of our lower people, some of our lessly compensated individuals are at 120 or 130% of salary is being paid out in benefits.
But on average, like if we just.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we work on a 40% markup when I'm just, spitballing back to the envelope, what will this cost us? I think that's a number 40% is.
Yeah, that's where my mind was too. So generally speaking, a professional staff is all in around 100,000 and somewhere in the ballpark of 40,000, assuming a family plan, which most people have family plans. Yeah, so I think that probably puts you in that
It's
40%
probably in that
range.
40. I mean, to give you a sense of how impactful that benefit can be, we have a contract with Lincoln to do their food service. And they requested that we give them a proposal to do all of it. And with us hiring staff, it was 60,000 for salaries, 85,000 for benefits
Right.
for that contract.
Because when you just use the 100 and the 40, that's just health. I mean, that's not for review.
Right,
short-term
Right, but not
disability.
all health
But
is
not every-
at 40 grand. Some of them
Yeah, I
are
guess
only
that's
at
true. So that's
12,
why you're
right?
saying an average of.
Right,
Mhm.
you know, so depending on what it is we're trying to do, we'll either zero in on an accurate number or use a generic
an estimate.
40% estimator.
When we're putting, like, when we have to be hired positions in a budget,
Mhm.
we always assume a family plan
Mhm.
so that we can cover ourselves in the event that we hire somebody there. And if they don't take that plan, then there's, you know, that is money that will contribute to the fund balance at the end.
All right, number 4.
So is this facilities director the position that was posted today?
It is.
How many admin assistants do we have?
Total across the district or within
That
the
makes
central
it-
office?
Oh, I guess, what are we on? Central office. I
Right,
guess what
central
makes the
office.
197, 766?
That reflects, 3.
And what is a coordinator?
Oh,
Well, hold on, let's get this one
sorry,
first.
can I just?
Sorry.
So the admin
Sorry.
assistant, at 197 is 3. And then we have another one that's grant Medicaid funded. That's not in this here.
How many people are those admins supporting?
You have an
Boy.
exec for the superintendent. You have one who is working with myself, Katrina, HR. So 3 for that individual. And then the other admin assistant is direct with the facilities director,
And the fourth is the
Medicaid.
Medicaid clerk and assistant to Beth as the director of student support services.
Which grant is that, the Medicaid one, is that the idea?
That's the one, yeah, that's not included in the 197.
Where would that be in the budget?
Well, that is a great question.
I've got a lot of them tonight.
I've been preparing all weekend for it. So one of the things that we have not done as a district, and we've talked about doing it, is in our budget, we do not have grants. They are separate and outside of our budget, accounted for and tracked outside of our general budget. This is our general fund budget. We've talked internally about how do we bring this all together? And the discussion typically within the board, within admin, is if we go from a 35 or let's just use the real numbers, 33 million last year, the year we're in, the roll forward of 37 million, and then we add all budget numbers, all the grant numbers into the budget. Now we're at 40 million. We're showing a $7 million increase in our spending. That optically is crushing. Because it's a 1-year huge increase in our top line expenditure. How is the warning written? It's written on what your top line expending.
How are other districts doing that? We're not the only district getting all these grants.
We're not, many districts are doing the same thing we are because it's the way, I love this comment, it's the way it's always been done, right? And transitioning into a better structure, I think we all agree, putting it all in is a better structure.
Well,
We can't explain the budget we have now to the public. Let's explain another $4.5 million on top of. I completely agree with you. And to 1% of our population, it will make sense.
But I think we need to put that in the parking lot, because I know we need to focus on this budget, but I think at the end of the day, like I looked up the uniform guidance audit, nice clean audit, but it's a lot of money, right? And so for the public, for the board to understand where that money is being spent and on what, because recognizing that grants allow for certain things to be allocated and certain not. I recognize we didn't have any unallowable costs, but are we being the most judicious with those funds and spending them where we should be? And I'd want to understand from administration why you've made the decisions to allocate what you have, whether that's administrative or overhead, what's your indirect rate, right? Like all those things. So can we put a pin in that for later?
I understood 1% of what you said, but yes.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So basically, what's the grant coming
Right,
in?
yep, and how are
How's
we
it-
using?
How are we
Yeah,
allocating
but
it?
she used a lot of big
And what's
words.
the accountability?
Throwing around
piece?
abbreviations.
What's the accountability
Yeah.
piece? Is it being spent
Yep, I've
for
got,
what
yeah,
it was?
that's
Right,
one
because
of
if you
the,
look up some,
Yeah.
the funds roll over year over year.
that's
right?
one of
And
the themes we've collected too,
yeah,
is just
exactly.
having that.
And nobody disagrees of the import of that comment.
Mhm.
And how do we bring that to our public in a way that says, we're increasing our budget by $6 million this year, or $5 million this year?
So on
Well, it
that,
wouldn't be presented that way, right?
It
Right,
wouldn't
no,
be,
it
but,
shouldn't
but,
be.
but I recognize that a lot of our community doesn't do much more than, they're not showing up at these meetings.
so can I ask one more question and then I'll move off this, because Ashley, I'm sorry, I know you had a
No,
question.
I'm
In our
good.
final audited financial statements that are public documents, just like all of these, how are those, I mean, the accounting guidance you're showing it as revenue when you're showing it as an expense, so
As a
it's
separate
not,
revenue account,
so
yeah.
it's not tying to kind of what people are seeing in this budget. So if they were to do the 1-for-1, it would be different, right? So we do have different sets of numbers out there that are public facing, which can be confusing.
And in addition to that, our top line expenditures would jump. Our revenue would
It
jump,
would jump, yeah.
our expenditures would be different, our ed spending would be the same,
I understand,
right?
I understand.
So that's a lot of squeeze for not a lot of juice.
It's also not transparent.
I was gonna say, it could be the bucket.
Well,
It could be the bucket
but
all
it's
by
not
itself.
transparent.
Well,
So-
it is.
It's
But
not
we
at the
can-
very top,
sorry,
but
yeah,
it's not,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
But we can, yes,
Yes.
that is.
Everybody agrees that that is a good path forward. How to do it is what we're struggling with.
Yeah.
And it could be something very similar to what we're looking at right now, the same structure and everything, right? And just presented separately, but let's finish what we're doing here and we know that that's one of the themes.
And
that
we're
we-
all the way on 4.
All the way on 4.
I think Ashley's question was what are coordinators?
Well, I thought I found my own
Oh, okay.
answer, but then it didn't add up, because then I went to, the other document of the, district staff and went through the coordinators that are listed there.
Yeah.
But that's more money than what is listed here. So I didn't answer my own question.
Is it because coordinators listed under special education staff and under
Oh, that's
central office
good point,
staff,
good point.
potentially,
Yeah.
and under other school-based staff?
Other central office. staff.
And this is FY 24, right, Floyd?
No, this is FY 25
25.
with the last failed budget numbers. The 35,957.
And so the staffing that I was showing was FY 24, the year we're in right now.
It's still was way off. Cause we have the data and assessment coordinator, instructional coordinator, social emotional learning and equity coordinator, special education coordinator ×2, early intervention and prevention coordinator.
So those would probably show in different places on here.
Different
Do you want to?
places. Some of them would be special ed.
So I think your question is, on this document right now, it says coordinator, what is in that?
What is in the central office staff coordinator?
Yeah. Cause we were also given a list of central office staff. So differentiating, how do these?
So some of that coordinator, understand that when Nate wrote this out, he wanted central office staff, what the board wanted from Nate was central office staff far more focused on running this district as opposed to student support coordinators. So what you're looking at is district-wide, right? An awful lot more individuals than coordinators for leadership out of central office. Do you have anything?
So those specific coordinators in the 252,544 are our social emotional learning and equity coordinator, our 2 ELP co-directors, and our, what's that, 0.5 data and assessment coordinator.
Cause then there's a coordinator
And one of the-
two,
I'm sorry, one
under
of the co-directors
two,
is 0.6.
Yeah,
and there's coordinators under three. Yeah.
And also in the line above, instructional leadership, that is myself and the instructional coordinator position.
Okay.
With some, I'm assuming offsetting revenue. All of the, most of those have offsetting revenue.
Number
Ready
6.
for 5?
Or-
Number 5.
Oh, shared health.
Yeah.
So what are, so sorry, what are the healthcare costs in that bucket? Because all the salaries include at a minimum the health plan. So what else, what's in that extra other bucket?
Is that HRA?
It's the HRA. It's our wild guess at
That's the HR.
what the HRA is gonna be.
And HRA stands for.
Health, something account.
So part of
The
the,
high deductible plan
retirement
that we have that we fund with the
No.
first dollars.
Oh, the high deductible.
so we
Okay.
have a
Yes.
$5,000 deductible for a family plan and the district pays the first 4,200 of it.
Right. And what
Per,
we can't say is, it's gonna be these people in these schools, so
Right.
we have a separate bucket for it.
Mhm.
And then we allocate it on the back end when we
Allocated on the
report to the
land.
states, to the state.
Thank you.
number 6.
Lloyd, do we ever make deals with our electricity companies? Like, they give us
I'm a
a
little,
quote.
I'm a
and we
little
say-
concerned. Do I
We
ever make,
say-
hey, I gotta.
Let me reframe for you.
Negotiate?
We had a person that asked if we negotiate. our-
We
our
negotiate those,
electricity
those
costs.
fees?
Yeah.
We haven't. We do have, a solar array in Robinson that we gave away some land for an array to be, it was very, I wouldn't have negotiated the deal as set. We get very little of what power is being generated on the land that we gave away, and we get to pay for our portion of the array. In years past, it was set up that it could only be allocated to Starksboro, so Robinson was the only school that could use those credits. So we had credits expiring. So when we talked negotiation, we did negotiate that piece to get it under the MAUSD umbrella so that we can spread those credits through the districts to have a little bit of, just a little bit of breathing room with what we've spent.
Do any of the other schools have any kind of solar panels on the roof?
No. We made the final round with, Senator Sanders on an earmark for Mount Aid a year and a half ago, and, we can say with a smile that we made the final round. We didn't get any money, but we also recognize, to your point, Cap, that we should have, look at that big flat roof over us
Yeah.
right now. We should have solar on there, and we need a new roof. So let's sequence this correctly, right? And get that, and we're still chasing money. There is opportunities, whether it's with Sanders or with other vehicles. And under the ARPA money, it allows for municipalities to be able to access some of the credits that weren't available to us in the past.
All right.
7.
Oh, we can,
I know,
no,
I
no,
know.
let's dive in.
We've got several million more categories to cover here.
Transportation. Legal. School-based supplies, a lot of pencils and erasers, but really it's an awful lot more than that. Non-school supplies. Voc ed, a portion of that, I'm sorry, I'm moving ahead. Is it, stop me if you want me to slow down.
So this is the Career Center sending us their tuition numbers, and we're
Correct.
getting some portion back from the state.
payment in lieu of, so they go direct, we don't get it,
It goes to
it
them
goes direct.
and it gets credited towards this.
Correct.
So that. This is where the voter actually sees the budget impact that they approve. When they approve the
Yep.
career center budget.
In number 10.
Number
See,
10.
11.
that's
Number
correct.
11.
So what was non-school based supplies and services?
It's a few items in there, Tammy, that non-school based supplies.
So it's for, I guess it's 4 people, it's their travel, supplies, the non-4 people, their supplies, travel, other services.
Are you in non-school based supplies?
Just to clarify, supplies and services.
Sure.
Such as,
Coming.
I'm guessing this is for the spring musical.
Unless that's under athletics and co-curriculars.
No, yeah, co-curricular. Is that what you're asking?
No, we're looking at number 10.
Number 10.
10,
Non-full.
no,
So
Okay.
it's the travel and the supplies for the for the fees and dues. For those
consumable supplies,
For not teachers. So like the funds, this is for like the 2510, which is fiscal services, which is our office. So let's see. Pre-K. Just travel.
What do you think?
Okay. We move on to 12. No questions in 12, 13.
is office equipment in there? Or does that come in under facilities? Yeah. I've seen it under 2510, but. We'll dig into that one a little bit and give you some more notes rather than dance with it right now. Athletics co-curricular,
Is it the stipend, like stipends, equipment or what?
sure.
You're talking about athletics now, or, yeah. So that's everything.
Transportation?
Transportation is separate. There's a transportation.
That's in the
athletic
transportation.
co-curricular line in that. Field trips co-curricular, 150
Okay.
Oh,
grand.
okay. No.
No, the question popped up about musicals. Musicals are special revenue funds. We do support them. I think 5,000 into the fall musical. 5 into the spring as well.
I think it looked more like 14,000 on the payroll as I saw.
We absolutely spend substantially more money than 5,000. Most of it is offset with the revenues. Set up as a special revenue fund is way more, what fall musical pushes 35 all in, $35,000 in revenue and expense, yeah. And the Friends of the Mount Aid Fall Musical is a wonderful contributor and supporter beyond what we spend as a district. So we're grateful to have them as friends of. There's just some goofy little things, I'll use this as an example. The person who puts costumes together is in New York in the garment district and buys, oh, this is perfect for Shrek. And buys 2 things of material, brings it back. The Friends of Fall musical pays for it and then invoices us at the back end to be reimbursed for it. Or in a lot of cases, donates it to us.
So under 13, Floyd, what's the 0 for PD stipend?
That's a great question. Professional development,
I think that's
we
a
don't
line-
stipend, go ahead.
That's the line that he had, but I think it's broken up in the other, compensations, additional compensations in the above lines.
In the above lines in each of the categories for
Like,
staff.
That might be a footnote.
Let's take it out.
yeah, we could take, that's what he had there.
Well, if somebody wanted to know where our PD stipends were.
Yeah, and just pull it out
Or
of
or at
all
least,
the
or
other
maybe,
compensations and put it in there. Sure.
Could you explain the difference between in-district professional development and the coaching? I know you're getting to coaching, so are these people that you're bringing in addition to provide presentations, or what is professional development in district?
Are you taking that one?
you're talking about 13, Barbara?
Yeah,
13 in district PD
yeah.
versus
Well, I know
coaches
the
and
coaches give professional development, or, I think they do.
so if
So
we
what
have,
in
if
that
we have a
What's in that?
professional development half day, those expenses would come in under that line. So if we bring someone in
Right.
as a presenter,
That's what I
um,
thought, but I just.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Right, how about 14?
there's a fun one.
That,
got a lot of
that
questions.
construction line gets a lot of chit chat.
Yeah, so what are we budgeting in there?
Right now,
What's in that?
what's in that? What are we expecting to spend $2.078 million on?
Mm-hmm.
It's really hard to sign a contract if we don't know we have the money.
Well, contracts for what?
Yeah, what are?
Well,
Or what are the
we're
priorities?
finishing this, we'll finish this HVAC project straddling 2 years. That will be part of it.
For Mount Abe?
So, sorry,
Go ahead.
you had mentioned when I asked about in the last meeting about encumbering some funds at the end of this year.
Sure.
I think the HVAC project was in there, so you're saying we're encumbering some of our money in this current fiscal year, but then we also need more money in next fiscal year's budget for HVAC? Is that what you're
Possibly.
saying? Possibly,
Well,
but we
so-
don't know.
Well, it's a great question, and with the ESSER money that we're paying, that we're receiving as part of payment for that HVAC projects that we're working on here and at Beaman, we're confident that we have savings through this year that will cover all of those costs. Because the project will overlap years, fiscal years, there's possibility that some of that may need to be shifted off to next year. Unlikely, but possible. So is that what we're doing? Not positive. There's still, with the unknown of next year, it would make sense for us to pay for as many things this year that we can out of what we have for an anticipated fund balance. Right now, we have, I think, 1.8 million in our fund balance allocated to cover that HVAC, cover the driveway parking lot at Moncton, and some small projects, flooring here, et cetera. I'll bring up for next year.
So are we at this point under contract with anybody for HVAC at Mount Abe and Beaman?
We are.
Okay, so how can we be under contract and not know how much it's going to be?
Well, we absolutely have a contract amount. We know how much our total amount is.
All right,
And a portion of it will be paid by ESSER. A portion of it will be paid by fiscal year 24 funds, depending on the balance, fund balance that we work with and through this year.
Mhm.
If that evaporates, if we spend it all down, some of that cost will be able to be shifted to next year. Assuming we have that money in the budget or some portion of it.
So how much of this 2.1 million is for the HVAC?
Well, it also depends on when the work is done.
Right.
Because if the
But
work is
how
done
did
in
you make up
June,
that number?
How did we come up with
Yeah, like,
two point oh
there's
seven
some
eight?
detail behind that. What's the detail behind it is what I'm
Got it.
asking.
With that particular line, it tends to work the other way.
Right.
That's how much money we have to get projects done. As opposed to, we pick projects and build the money for it. So that works a little differently than some other lines in the budget.
We're basically building a chunk of money in every year,
Understood.
and we've been increasing that recently just because of inflation.
Mhm.
So that's a set amount that we agree to throw in the budget in the fall.
I wonder,
Sort of a round number.
Recognize also part of that was anticipation of purchase of central office. With funds from 24, funds from 25. Right, we had built that in the event that we got a positive opportunity to save all of that money with the purchase.
so was that taken out of this 2 point?
No, because we're
So
gonna
it's still in
spend,
here.
rather than 1.2 million to purchase, we're at 1.8 million minimum to refab any other space. So our costs are going up by 50% with that no vote.
And in the event the money isn't spent for whatever the next iteration of central office holds, that money then would go into the schools to do work there.
Liz, you had your hand up online.
Yeah, and I was just reflecting on past projects where we perhaps put out a number that we hoped that we'd be able to get the project done with and then needed more. So I appreciate if we take an approach that you're doing here, saying we may need more. And so this is what we asked for happening right now, saying this is our estimate and this is, we may need more. I mean, we asked to know ahead of time if something might cost more than it's projected to cost. So I think that's what we're seeing right now.
Well, I'm gonna pull it back here just for a second, and the question is, what have we earmarked this money for? To Patrick's point, it's in there, and it's a matter of prioritizing the. Let me go to the total here. On our capital plan, we have about $4.6 million of projects that we can fund. So it comes down to three things. What do we have for money? What do we have for timing? And what do we have for sequencing? Right? You know, there's we're working on all of those items in an arena of kids are showing up at the end of August.
yeah, and I wonder if this just maybe ties back to kind of the overall point of some of this. Like, I think the request was for big buckets so that we could have broad conversations. I mean, obviously we want to be well-versed ourselves. But I think in this case, like, this is a pretty simple message. Either we have a list of projects that we know exceeds what we're going to be able to get in a given year. And so we ask for a big chunk of that to at least make progress on those. Or we could set it up in a way that we say, our total land or footprint is X million dollars. And we know that on average, we need a certain percentage of that every year in terms of construction or maintenance. Like, it seems like there should be ways in which we can articulate the strategy that we're using that gets us to that number without necessarily having to go down to like the detail of like, and we're going to use this tile, which is going to be this much per square foot. Like, that's a level of detail, I think, that we talk about trust. That's a level of detail that we have to trust, I think, the district to be doing correctly. Otherwise, we'll never get anywhere with the budget because we're gonna be lost on every bit. So I like the idea of us as a board having some understanding of these, but I do think that we want to be thinking about what's the message overall, because I don't know, we've been in this for an hour. I don't know how many are still with us, like, but where does this get us to where we need to go? And I think there are ways we can do that with.
Well, that's
broader
the
brush.
facility committee that we had, and then we tied it with the finance. But to give you I'll pick one item. We've done a safety vestibule here at Mount A. That front entry is really designed as a safety opportunity for us coming in. We're at about $700,000 to do the same at Beaman, Bristol, Moncton, Robinson. And that's just the front entry would be $700,000 to do that one project. To bring all of our schools to that same safety level that we've moved to here. That's what the $2.1 million represents, is items of big stature that we have to, get clarity to say we have this money, so that we can then go out to bid for it. It's unfortunate, you look at our structure often where the lobby project 2 years in advance of the money, we thought we were at 1.6 million, it came in at 2.9 all in. And that was in the space of a year and 8 months between when we got an initial estimate and when we went out to bids. Is that about right? Year, 8 months? Wasn't 2 years. So that snapshot that we're taking today on the construction line is, and I don't mean to be evasive on this, it's not my intent at all, but it's difficult to say, this is the project we want to do when we don't know if we have the money. And we don't know what the cost is going to be based on the inflators. And we don't know what the priority is within the board, to Mike's point. But having the money available to do stuff is the key piece here.
And I think what many of us heard in the meetings last night and today was that if it's a choice, when doing any of these big ticket items and putting boots on the ground and keeping teachers in the classrooms, that we have to make those priorities.
I completely agree with that. And
So
I
we
would
have to
say,
be- we have to
and
be
I would
clear
say,
with what we're doing and
and
why we're
I
doing
would
it.
say without reservation, that the message that's been given to the public is we're riffing people. Not once have we said we're going to riff people. What we have said as a district is we have a contractual requirement to give these rifts to these individuals because of the way our collective bargaining agreement is written. So those rifts had to go out. With not once have I heard, Patrick, or in our conversations, have we said, we think we're going to have to pull the trigger on all of these. I would say that we're closer to that conversation today, having not been able to pass a budget and creating distrust over rifts that the public is now fearful of. To your point, I'd rather dump the construction line than lose anyone in a riff. When not once has Patrick said we're going to riff. He said we have to contractually notify these individuals that in the event that we have a budget at 87% of our current budget, because we can't pass one, these are the possible rifts that we'll have to make. So the piece out to the public is the fear of that is now all encompassing. And let's dump the construction line. Let's take away from improving the district. And if that's what we should do, if it really comes down to losing staff or bricks and mortar, well, let's keep the staff. I don't think anybody disagrees with that. The point that I'm trying to make is that's not where we're at. You know, the last two presentations Patrick has made is we think we can do this, taking advantage of this, and this without having to lose, without having to riff any of our teammates.
I will just add as well that I've always seen as maintaining buildings isn't really an option. Your option is pay less now or pay more later. That's the reality when it comes to facilities. And when you don't take care of facilities, you run the risk of them not being usable.
Mhm.
And that's a real problem. We've seen that happen in other places.
Or safe.
Right, or safe. Like I'm thinking about some of this money is to finally replace and repair the ceiling in the multipurpose room at Robinson that has had things falling from it for years and going in and kids eat in there, like. So we could absolutely take all of that $2 million out and none of those things are gonna get done. And we've not demonstrated, we've actually demonstrated multiple times as a community, we're not gonna get behind a bond. So plan A for years was get a bond, get a bond, get a bond, unsuccessful. Plan B was, we have no money to do anything. So 7 or 8 years ago, the Mount A board said, plan B can't be nothing. So the Mount Abe board, before we merged, put $1 million in the Mount Abe budget to address the facilities needs that were not getting addressed by a bond. The bond, even today, a bond is a much smarter money. Paying 3, 4, 5% on a bond versus 7, 8, 10, 12% cost escalation of construction services. Absolutely. This money could be reduced significantly if it was transitioned to long-term debt payment on a bond instead. We can go out for a bond and we can apply some of this to cover that cost. Until we do that, the work needs to still get done in order to keep these buildings safe. And I'm held responsible by policy to ensure that our facilities are in proper condition. So this money helps me adhere to that policy.
Liz,
And I think we'd be remiss not to connect this to what I believe what a lot of community I've heard is that thinking about future planning, that we have the second oldest building block of schools in the country. What can we afford to invest in to bring up to par? And so I think that a lot of this conversation could come after this specific budget in terms of really going into the details of how much would it cost to get up to standard for safety requirements by law for each of the schools. What would it take? And the state is even looking at bringing back construction support, but they're going to require that we've looked at the capacity of our buildings, we've looked at what it would take to get them there, all of those things. So they have a laundry list of requirements for them to support us. That is a huge piece of our future planning, and I think going to be a really important conversation in the near future over the course of the next year.
I will just add, and this is something I struggle with every single year. Sadly, $2 million doesn't get you very far with 300,000 square feet of commercial space. I wish that weren't true. That's the reality.
I don't mean to like push us through, but I am gonna push us through a little bit. Are there any other big items on here that people are feeling like they really need answers on for between 15 and the end, 15 and 18?
I have just one question.
Yeah.
What is the monthly rent for Munsell Avenue?
So we rent central office and we rent office equipment. For example, office equipment here in Mount Abe is $38,000.
But what's the actual rent for the
72.
office? A year?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other things in this that people really have to ask questions about?
The only thing I'll point out, this debt here, 63,977 for 300,000 square feet, 5 campuses is that's no debt. Almost every district would carry exponentially greater debt in bonding and things like that. That tends to be the approach.
Are people good with this one, and we move on to the next part, which is the ELP? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Flora. Thank you.
Well, come on over, we'll dive in deeper.
You're too
Another
excited.
full-time job.
All right.
Bear with me, I clicked on the wrong screen to close.
Uh-oh, did you lose it a bit?
No, I just lost the document I was pulling everything up on.
Yeah, the only.
Yeah, I can get it. I was just here, why do I have to verify it's me?
Verified it's you.
See if I can remember this password.
While Patrick's pulling that up, does anyone have any questions that they're really need?
Just wondering what the district, the ELP was planning on doing with their readiness grant money. Almost $211,000.
We're using it for the middle school program.
Okay. That's why it's free. Thank you.
General budget.
All right, Floyd, I think we're ready for the ELP.
ELP, sure.
7 minutes or less.
Any questions? Moving on, thank you. I think what the question that was raised was how much of general funds is going to support ELP? And I think that's the highlighted top lines, right? Revenue and the general fund for fiscal year 23 was $92,000. If you drop down, it was on a $1.1 million budget, which works out to about 8.41%. This year, year to date, we're at 75.7 of general fund contribution to ELP on about $1.02 million or 7.41. Our percentage of contribution of the total budget is currently less than last year, mostly because of the expansion of the program. We have great revenue coming from the family payments this year so far, and the DCF subsidy substantially increased. So you know, the public perception is that that taxpayer dollars are paying for a huge amount of this. In reality, 7% of the total budget, which is required under the grant structure that we bring in-house portions of the expense in order to continue to receive the grant. That's where we're at with this.
And again, I just think this is an opportunity for positive messaging, right? I mean, it says we're getting $10 or more for every dollar we spend to provide this wonderful opportunity for students in our community, for families in our community that need this kind of support. And we're getting 10 times the return for the dollars that we put in as taxpayers, right? And you get that amazing service. Like, I don't know, it seems to me like there's lots of questions that are swirling. I think it's incumbent on us to point out like the many positives that are present in this district. And I don't know, to me with numbers like that, that's a pretty easy sell, unless I'm missing something blatantly. Like, what are you gonna 10x investment return and get all the support and services to go with it?
Like, talk to your admin assistants about the reuse recycle program. You know, every one of them are contacting ELP to say, hey, I need pants and shirts for a 7-year-old. And the next day there's 3 sets of pants, shirts, and a pair of sneakers and a sweatshirt and a gym bag if they need it. For that admin assistant to, here you go, Floyd, you're all set. And it's simple, clear, done. And to your point, a spectacular opportunity. They did something on the green a few weeks ago, and a family from Shelburne stopped and said, can anybody come in here? And yes, anybody can come in and go through. And they said, I wish we had something like this in our community. The beauty of that is you have the family stopping in the BMW, standing next to someone who's struggling economically, and they're all on equal footing. That's the beauty beyond anything else of what ELP does, is everybody gets access if they want.
Can I just ask sort of a perception question that sort of ties into what Mike was saying? So the ELPs are embedded into the schools, right? They have dedicated classrooms at Bristol Elementary, for example. So how does it work with they're not totally funded by us, but so do they pay rent to use those spaces, or like, how does the grant work so that how does that?
That's a
work?
great question, and one that we're exploring currently. You have to spend down your grant money, right?
Mhm.
And to this point, we've worked really hard not to charge for space. And just using that as a way to support without dollars going out directly. There's indirect costs, certainly, the lights are on. But they're indirect costs to support that program. Tough to quantify. A lot of work, and what, do we get much out of that if we were billing $17 for electricity in the classroom? I would say it's so far down in the weeds that it doesn't make sense. But I'll say the other side of that, if the grant isn't being spent down, we haven't been able to line this up or get this program up and going, there is an opportunity for us to charge rent for the space and bring the money into a general fund position for us as a district, and then perhaps reuse it in another way within the district. So kind of went around your question, but to give you, yes, we can do it, we don't do it currently.
I just asked because whenever I'm in the building, those spaces are typically closed, or, right, the lights are off, no one's in there, whatever. Perception is reality. Are those spaces closed off for general use during the school days because it has ELP on the door?
Typically, no. There's
Typically,
some
no.
shared space, some of it's shared, some of it's closed off. I'm trying to think. Yeah, the mentor program will use it.
Sometimes small groups work in there, individual tutoring sessions can go in there, art projects all over the place. Interventionists use one of the rooms upstairs. I'd say that the one at Robinson, way downstairs, I always called it the solarium. I love that room. I don't think that's often used because it's so far really away. It's not a classroom, but we worked really hard to make sure that we're coexisting together in our spaces.
Yeah, because we hear a lot about that. Well, I have heard a lot about, like, the spaces feel closed during the school days, which is just something I think with this perception of what ELP is and how we are using it and coexisting, that it's important to understand that.
And I would add to that, in the same way that our space generally is available to our community, whether it's a volleyball group coming in, gymnastics, a garage sale, rummage sale for the travel club.
Mhm.
And those items aren't charged for
Right.
to our community, to use Patrick's term, we should be working hard to wear our buildings out with usage by our community.
When we started, we actually had ELP in actual classrooms because all the classrooms were full. We didn't have the luxury of all of these sort of empty-ish classrooms. So we're happy to be beyond that part because that was tricky.
Probably also worth noting, we often compare food service and ELP. Structurally, they're very similar. They have independent sort of revenue streams. And likewise, we see them both as part of MAUSD. It's part of the sort of suite of offerings that we provide. So much as we wouldn't bill food service for rent. I see ELP in a
Even
similar
as
way.
a separate revenue, right?
And both have general fund contributions to support them.
Any other questions on the ELP page? And we can move on to the next one,
See if I can.
which is, so these are slightly out of order for what we had put as what was important for us, but are people okay with just following it, or would we rather focus on?
Oh, sorry, this came in a different order. We'll work in order. So number 3 was your second priority.
Yeah.
So that's the one that will go next.
So that's the delineation of
Yep.
central office staff.
So again, I tried to set a little context for sort of a conversation about central office to sort of articulate what a central office sort of does in really broad terms. And then part of the challenge with central office conversations is if you ask 5 people to define central office, you're gonna get 5 different definitions. So this is how I define central office. For me, it's that first bucket when I think of central office positions. Nate uses the term middle managers. So I'm thinking about directors that are in that sort of middle management range. And then I have positions here that I'm thinking of as teacher leader positions. And there's a lot of different types of teacher leader positions throughout the district. I listed the ones that I think people are probably talking about when they sometimes group them in central office. And the request was for salary information, but salary information as a standalone tells you not much of anything. So as best as I could, I looked across Addison County to compare sort of apples to apples, those same positions in the county and what their average salaries are. So you had a basis for comparison. One of the challenges is how the roles and responsibilities of that central office provides gets carved up among the staff in central office varies tremendously. So apples to apples can sometimes be tricky. So this was sort of the best attempt to do that. I also thought the job descriptions was important. So you had a sense of like, so what does that job really do? So all of those job descriptions are there. And then what contract they're covered by, because they're governed differently by different contracts. And then many of them have offsetting revenue in the form of grants and other cost sharing. So I thought that was important to know. So that's kind of the gist of what I prepared for you.
Patrick, I have a question. We had a comment today, about the cost differentiation from years ago to now for central office. And I was wondering, there's like, something's wrong in some places. Could some of these, positions have been listed in other places? So that now it looks like it's a bigger budget because there are more people there?
We were looking at pre-consolidation, so central office
Yeah.
was like 175,000, for example, and then post MAUSD, and now it's like 1.6 million.
So I don't know where they were getting their information from, but if someone's talking about 175, the way it used to work, a district, so the Bristol Town School District, the Starksboro Town School District, remember each town had its own school district, was assessed the supervisory union or central office, their portion of those costs. So if they're talking about, I promise you, even 15 years ago, 20 years ago, the total cost for central office staffing and expenses was not $175,000. So if they're talking about an amount around that figure, where my mind goes, it was the district's portion that they were assessed of the central office expenses.
Which is sort of what we kind
Yeah.
of arrived at that meeting.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
What's an other contract or agreement? You have admin, director's policy, and then there's other, what does that mean?
Yeah, so building principles are, well, so I guess I'm thinking about,
What's the datum? or-
right, so they're not admin contracts, but they're also not covered by the director's policy, they're not covered by the support staff agreement, and they're not covered by the teacher's agreement. So they're sort of in this other category. The other and the admin, I think, could be in a similar bucket, but I thought it would be misleading to suggest that the senior information systems manager has an admin license. So I was sort of thinking about this one bucket split into two, a group that are administrators that have sort of licenses of sorts versus this other middle management that doesn't necessarily have that licensure.
So
I'm
those
sorry to
are-
interrupt, but could you please share the screen?
Oh, sorry.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Sarah.
So those are each of those separately negotiated.
Technically, I would say yes. The way it operationally happens is they follow the percent new money that the teacher contract settles on.
The director's policy, so.
Nope, these tend to follow the teacher's contract, not the director's policy. So the director's policy tends to follow the support staff agreement,
Okay,
and these other contracts tend to follow the professional staff agreement.
all right, but in essence, the contract arrangement is separately negotiated.
Correct. So they're each person. It's not a contract that covers
Yes.
multiples. Each person gets an individual contract.
We're sharing a screen.
That could be the descriptor, individual contract. Or separately negotiated.
Did you say?
Sarah, you're still unmuted, just so
So
you know.
tomorrow I have, sorry.
anymore.
Actually, one quick question for clarification. This was, for me, super helpful. And I really love the average salary comparison for the other districts. And I guess including ours as well. Is it fair to say that in each of those positions, there is a person in each of the districts who holds that role? In other words, were some of those averages coming from 2 districts or just 1 district or 3 districts, or are they all coming from 3?
None of them are 1, some are 2, some are 3.
Okay. I wonder if that might be helpful. I don't know if it's a door I want to open, but maybe I have. So sorry. Sorry.
Yeah, close it now.
Yeah, in the sense that, you know, if there are concerns about our central office overall, I think being able to say, essentially, 1, we're in line salary range, which is what essentially that column is suggesting. But maybe beyond that, that we've decided that certain positions, the positions that we've decided are important to have in a district are also the positions that nearby districts have also decided are important to have, right? If it's apples to apples or something close to that, then I think that might limit some of the concerns about bloat in the central office, unless those concerns are like, actually, everybody in the state has bloat, and okay, that's a problem that's maybe bigger than us. By contrast, and this is where I start to have a little trepidation, because I should have known before I opened my mouth, if it's like we've got 13 positions and really the other districts have 5 and 6, and they're somewhat comparable, that might give weight to some of those concerns. But maybe in the sense of transparency, it's good to know so we could discuss that.
So that, I'll circle back to my earlier comment about how everyone has a different definition of central office.
Yeah.
So there's actually like there are these salary surveys that various organizations do, and one of those shows all central office positions. What some districts show in that central office salary survey and other districts don't, like it's all over the map. So some of these positions aren't listed in that, and I reached out to the superintendents to say, I know you have a position that does this same thing as the position we have listed on the salary survey. So what does that person do for you? And what do they make so that I can add it here? So that's where it becomes tricky to compare apples to apples, because you have, first we have to get a common definition of what is central office. For example, so I put NA when there wasn't any job that was even close to what we have listed in our central office, listed in one of their central offices. So the Director of Safety and Title IX Coordinator. Every district has somebody paying attention to their emergency operations planning, but also helping with HHB and Title IX investigations. In many places, that's a licensed administrator who can do the investigation and possibly even be issuing consequences to students. I didn't see anyone list that in their central office listing, and I know of positions that exist in other places. For us, we have it listed here in that sort of director level. Our person doesn't get the, isn't a licensed administrator and doesn't have compensation that would, you know, be similar to what that would be expected to get. But I put NA because it wasn't listed anywhere, and
Yeah,
it was a hard apples to apples to agree.
I certainly appreciate the nuance and the difficulty of comparing across data sets. I guess what I'm suggesting is, like, if in the places where you felt confident doing that already with salary, which again is imperfect even in its own right, I'm sure, because they're not perfect analogs. It might be nice to be able to further support that and say, and yet they actually both these other districts have that position. Or if it's only one, like, does that make sense in terms of just, I don't, broad strokes?
To be able to say the structures are similar.
Yeah.
In Addison.
And I don't want, it doesn't have to be piecemeal exactly, but to kind of get the broad sense of, like, how do we compare overall, which I think is voices we've heard of concern.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I, as a board member, and maybe the rest of the board feels differently, have felt adequately prepared to speak to that. This actually gets me a lot closer. But the last bit is, I could imagine a data scenario, and this is unlikely, where Addison Northwest and ACSD only have half the staff, and it just happened to split out 5 and 5. And so this looks comparable, but in reality, we have twice the staff.
Right.
I don't think that's the case.
Yeah.
Right. So being able to just speak against that potential concern I think would bolster this comparison, which would say, whatever concerns you may or may not have about the central office, we're kind of doing the same thing in peer districts. And there might be some reason for that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I started
Yeah.
a notebook. I was digging into this myself because I was curious, because everybody's like top heavy, top heavy. So I went through and investigated 11 school districts comparable to our size, kind of in our region, Vermont, you know. And it's hard to go apples to apples.
So hard.
Yeah.
That was very challenging, I learned. I didn't notice, nothing was like blatantly like, holy cow, for me, but I had the same, like, how do we? And I think the other thing that we were talking about this last night, people don't understand is education in general has changed so much in the last 10, 20, 30 years.
3.
3
years.
Yeah. For some people, they're like, well, I don't understand why they need so many people there. But and the asks of state and federal components of running an educational institute have like intensified. And I don't think people who had kids in the school district 30 years ago understand that that looks a little bit different.
And that is a challenge, right? So essentially, every piece of legislation that's passed that's related to education adds work to usually a central office. So the threat assessment team legislation that was written last spring has required trainings for threat assessment teams that have to be documented. We have to report to the state that each person on that team has received all the training that they're required to get, and we submit that up. That alone isn't huge, but that's one of how many pieces of legislation that requires somebody to implement, track, put the teams together. Between myself and the director of safety, we probably have 30 hours in to the threat assessment work in thinking about policy stuff and procedures and interpreting the statute and implementation of that. We had our first team meeting recently, which brings in, it's a interagency kind of a team. So it's the frequency and the intensity of these unfunded mandates that are coming has been really significant in recent years, and there's no sign of it letting up anytime soon.
Can I add one small detail to that position? Director of Safety, you know where the state requires us to report that? Facilities. That's a facilities position. It's not leadership, it's not a director level, it's a facilities position.
So when I see a shared endeavor with Edison Northwest, is there an option for us to look at sharing some other positions within the central office grouping?
Yep, effectively every time. So in some of my other documents that I shared, I mentioned that every time there's a vacancy, we explore, do we have to fill or do we not have to fill? Oftentimes in central office, that conversation includes, is there a way to partner with somebody to help sort of ease the burden and make the job still reasonable? So we always explore those things. We explored that with our director of facilities and grounds, and the opportunity wasn't there. I think it's a direction we should be moving in. Frankly, I think we should have fewer school districts and fewer central offices altogether. I've said that publicly a bunch of ways. That's the blow, right? We have too many central offices in Vermont. I don't think there's a single central office that is bloated, but we have too many of them. We don't need 56 superintendent's offices in the state. But until something changes to reduce that, we need the people we have in central office to function with a $40 million business that has 600 employees or whatever the number is. That takes a lot of people to manage and operate on a day-to-day basis. But it doesn't take a whole lot more than if it was a 2,000 student school district than if it's a 1,000 student school district.
Might be interesting as a public face of like the tiering of those 600 employees, right? Like, how does that all tier out in terms of the oversight and management? Kind of like, I love this. Like, the highlight of my opening, all these.
Holding up your flow chart, Floyd.
Loved it, but like, something that's like, look, we have 400 people working in our schools. This was what it takes.
So now we are sharing just 2 positions with Addison Northwest at this point.
Yeah, so food service and so director and assistant director of food service are the 2 positions we're sharing at Addison Northwest. We share other things, so sports teams and things of that nature.
We do share within food service, we have a fill-in person.
Sort of like a
Right,
floating
so
sub for.
we can't tell which district is gonna have 2 people not show up in food service. So Mount Aid, we have an employee to fill those gaps. And when they go to Addison Northwest, Tammy's very excited about having to go through another invoice and bill for it. But that is set up and it's works great for both of us. We don't have to, we are protected. The kids get fed and the cost is shared.
Any other big questions on this one?
I guess, like, a lot of these are grant funded, and how long do these grants run for? Do we reapply for them? Like, what's the stability of that?
That's always a question, isn't it? I'll look to the folks that are managing those grants on a day-to-day basis. Some are more questionable than others.
You don't have to dig into each one, just in general.
I can only speak to the Title II grant, which we use for a couple of the teacher leader positions. It is always questionable how much we're gonna get. I still don't know our allocation for next year. But we can usually ballpark it based on past allocations. So that's for the 2 teacher leader positions in the instructional and SEF coordinators. And then for mine, it's because I manage the grant, that was pretty secure. As long as we're gonna continue to get a grant, they're gonna allow us to spend at least that 0.2 on the support that I provide to the grant. Actually, I don't think I can actually spend any more than that. There's some rules around how much of the FTE you're allowed to spend. I can only speak to those. I don't know about.
Yeah, that's the same for IDE. It would be, we haven't been allocated the funds yet. But we're hoping it'll be comparable amount to what we have this year.
Okay.
So your note at the end, Patrick, MAUSD has routinely lost strong teacher leaders.
Mhm. Yeah, so we've lost 5 or 6 anyway, come to mind. People who have been in coordinator positions and they leave our district to go to other districts to be an administrator. Sometimes that's a building principal. Sometimes they're doing basically the same work they're doing for us, but they're paid as an administrator in that district because in that district, the work they do is an administrator position.
The difference really being that they have supervision and evaluation duties, ours do not.
Or work year round.
Correct.
You know, the teacher leader label is a little confusing for me because I see that in contracts as being an actual student-facing teacher with some leadership responsibility. Not, I think these folks are, they're not working directly with kids, right? These are actual support positions.
As a general rule, I would say that's accurate. Part of the reason for teacher leader positions is A, they're on the teacher contract.
Yeah.
But B, they also, many of these do get a teacher leader stipend that is the same stipend that like Mount Aid teacher leaders get here, if they're sort of the lead person in their department.
So they're getting a stipend on top of their salary for doing the work that's in their job description?
For some of them, yeah. And part of that is because there are additional responsibilities. So like Beth will talk more about the LEA responsibilities that the special education coordinators have.
They teach all day and then they do the teacher leader in addition to the full day of working with students. The teacher leaders.
So
Right,
this is work beyond their teaching?
No, these 6 teacher leader positions that Patrick is categorized in this way, do not have regular contact with students on a daily basis.
Okay,
Their roles 100% do involve supporting students at different levels.
right.
So the early intervention and prevention coordinator, for example, part of that job description is homeless transitional housing liaison.
Yeah.
100% works with kids and families to help support that work.
Yeah.
Special ed coordinators, the social emotional learning and instructional coordinators certainly do assessments and help work directly with kids to alleviate some of the lift of the teacher.
Okay.
And that's just as a sort of, so the teacher leader positions, the work that they do, if they're not doing it, either goes to a central office administrator or a building administrator or classroom teachers. So that work, much of this work has to be done by law, and if they're not doing it, it gets passed on to somebody else to do.
So I think your note basically is to point out that these folks are actually given more responsibility and paid more in their similar role in a different district.
Yeah, like, so for example, Champlain Valley, I think, has a special ed director for each building. And so they perform similar responsibilities to our special education coordinators. We don't have one per building because we're not big enough for one per building, but it's the same kind of work that they're being asked to do. Our folks are on a teacher contract. In Champlain Valley, they're on a admin contract. And so when an opportunity, we do a great job of securing great people, training them up,
And
sending
sending
them
them
off
on
to somewhere else.
Are you segueing?
That did sound like a
It
segue, didn't
certainly
it?
feels like it, and that's 9:06, Kathy.
Yeah.
Segue?
Well, I was just looking at, we had three that were really our top three, and we've done the first two. The third one is the coaches and coordinators model. We have like 4 other ones after that, but I'm wondering, capacity, first of all, for everybody, and 2, we still have other things on our agenda, so how would people feel about just hitting our third largest bullet point that came from the survey we all did? Do people feel comfortable with just digging into that last 3rd bullet point? Okay, and then we'll move on in the agenda. And all this information for people on Zoom will be in our public record, right? It'll be all available. So if you want to peruse it on your own, you can. And people in the audience here got a hard copy, but it is all going to be available online as well.
On the agenda, or on the minutes, you mean?
I think so, yeah.
But that was
So-
normally more than, like, that's only 5 days after, so can it be linked on the agenda so that everyone can access it, like,
We could,
now?
yeah, we could probably do that.
Would it be actually be possible to put it front page on the website?
Yeah.
I think that would be helpful.
Something.
Yeah, we could put that one document there, then all the links would be live and.
Yeah.
Maybe
Much
do it-
easier to access.
Maybe do it like tomorrow instead of putting the 5 days.
Tina, do you mind just jotting a note to that
I'll
effect
send
when you
it
talk
right
to
now.
Jennifer? Okay.
They can't look at any of this stuff other than just sharing the screen, so it's kind of not helpful.
Okay, so number 3 is the coaches and coordinators model that we'll dig into.
So as I said in my narrative that I hope you all had a chance to look at, I tried to be concise, but I do recognize there's lots of links to help direct you so you can go deeper into some of the thinking. But as I said right at the beginning, in order to understand the why behind our commitment to professional learning in this way, it's important to kind of go back to go forward. So I provided you a 1-pager that speaks to a way that I've consolidated sort of our journey since really 2007 around strategic planning and embedded PD. A lot of the reasons why we decided to design a more robust instructional leadership model was because we built a strategic plan that took us 3 years to write and had a lot in there that folks knew teachers couldn't take on all themselves. And also when we became a consolidated district, looking at all then 6 of our schools and seeing that there had been a strong coaching model here already. And there had been one that was started that had been going on for decades, and one that had started at Moncton as well. And so thinking about how could we capitalize on those successes, but ensure that all of our schools had opportunity for that kind of leadership was our direction that we took back in 2019-20. So as I said on that first page, after doing a lot of research and using, I referenced the district management group, the Vermont report, and put the link in there. That was back when Nate Levinson worked for the DMG. So he's kind of had his eye on our district in Vermont for a long time. So we got a lot of our thinking around how to create this type of embedded support through that report, and going to a lot of his trainings as well. Also keeping in mind a lot of the work that our region was doing at the time was kind of ahead of us in a lot of ways in terms of shoring up training for coaches. A really good teacher is a really good teacher, and working with adults is different. So it was important that we also made sure that we were providing them with the training they needed in order to help adult learners. So we participated very heavily with the Champlain Valley Educator Development Center, which is our what's called an ESA, Educational Service Agency, from Addison County all the way up to Grand Isle County. We're all part of that same organization. We pay a slight due on an annual basis and get individual teachers can get discounts on participating in the BD that they offer for individuals, and we can send cohorts of folks to get the type of training we did. At the end of my narrative, I linked some of the gurus in instructional coaching across the country, and the one that we spent a lot of time with the whole region learning from was Jim Knight. He actually came here for a couple of years, in fact, and helped to work with teams from individual districts and supervisory unions to get stronger in this work. So that was getting in preparation for becoming a consolidated district and launching into a new strategic plan. So as I wrote on the front page, when we were fully actualized and had the full gamut of folks that we had in mind, we had a literacy coaching team of 5, we had a math coaching team of 5, we had a social emotional learning team of 5, and then we also had a proficiency-based learning team. It was one full-time and then one part-time teacher here at that time, just here focused on non-aid because of the requirement to turn to proficiency-based learning and proficiency-based graduation requirements. That's where we started, and then that expanded to then where we kind of are now with that focus on PBL K-12. As life went on after the little interruption of the pandemic, at which time a lot of the instructional coaches assignments completely changed, right? So all of a sudden they all, particularly the literacy and math folks, were instrumental in supporting our schools and our teachers in designing what the remote learning was going to look like. And that was like on a dime. Like, how are we going to make this accessible to families at home? How are we going to make it robust and make it not just about, you know, get on this online program, but actually meet with your teachers. And then while that teacher is working with a small group, there might be an array of different types of online activities that you can either do live or you can do and come back and write about it. It was it's pretty amazing what we were able to do. If you all remember those months of time. Once we came back after remote learning was sort of tapering a bit, we really weren't all finished, and the coaches became virtual elementary school teachers. So if you recall, Mount Aid went to sort of a part-time schedule for kids, 2.5 days, I believe it was, in 2.5 days, and teachers developed some of the asynchronous work that they could do at home on the other days. Well, for the elementary schools, there was a cohort, even though they opened full-time sooner, we allowed the opportunity for families who were either worried about health risk or kids were sensitive or wanted to take us up on this opportunity. We did a VES, virtual elementary school, for the rest of that year. The instructional coaches were the teachers. So that's shifted their role again. And then we started losing people. As Patrick said, many of our folks in that cadre went on to do other things and become administrators, and some right here in our own district. Our 2 assistant principals at Bristol were both instructional coaches for us. And they were hard to fill. The positions are hard to fill, and all of that instructional knowledge, all that institutional knowledge, if you will, kind of went along with them. So how do we back up and retrain more people? We end up actually kind of taking from each other around the region, and that wasn't really serving us super well. The turnover, and then also that coupled with the declining enrollment that we were seeing, we were taking advantage of attrition and did not fill many of those positions. So fast forward to today, we currently have 7. We no longer really delineate sort of a literacy team and a math team, a little bit, though those coaches in that group of 7 all have an affinity or additional expertise in one of those 2 areas. And I keep saying math and literacy and SEL, but the math and literacy piece, I think, is an important point that I should make. You know, you have to prioritize, right? And so as a district, we're often held most accountable to the big buckets of math, literacy, and SEL to another degree. So those were where we put our energies, just as a matter of trying to help with early intervention and prevention in the elementary schools, have some vertical alignment so that when they went up into Mount A, presumably they had some similarity of experience in those elementary schools. So it made it that much easier for the kiddos to be successful in middle and high school. So the math and literacy is a focus. And so those are the teachers that benefit most from the coaching positions. I think that just needs to be a side note that I didn't really explicitly say in my narrative. So we have 7. They're also skilled in universal design for learning. So we're doing a lot around how to help our classrooms and our teachers differentiate, modify, accommodate their lessons, the work that they're doing in the classroom, so that more kids can be successful in the context of core instruction. So instead of just saying, I'm just the literacy coach, we're there to help in any way we can in that group of 7. And then for the social emotional learning and equity team, we have 1.6 folks at this point. Again, we tried to fill the SEL coach positions last year into the summer, and we weren't successful. And so we are trying some other strategies. We have a lot of folks, Beth didn't get a chance to share tonight, but we'll talk about it someday. We have a lot of folks who, obviously, we all have to focus on social emotional learning. It's the whole child. It's everything that we're doing for our students ourselves. So how do we use our school counseling team, our school-based clinicians, special educators, and work with the teachers to help all of us sort of elevate what we're doing? It's not coaching per se, but we are definitely finding ways to intervene and support and bring resources to the teachers. We can do better in that area for sure. And as you've seen, the recent iteration of the budget does have us hope that we might have at least 1.4 of those positions filled so that we can help with that support moving forward. And one less math coach is what we've mapped out for the next iteration that we hope will pass, if that's the direction you want to go. This commitment with the All Learners Network makes us feel like we're going to continue with having them provide us with some support. We have a retiring math coach we're not going to fill, so it's an attrition opportunity yet again. I tried one last piece. I tried to give you just sort of what do they do, by the way, right? So those little paragraphs, and boy, it's nutshell, guys, right? So trying to make it, you know, a little bit palatable for you. But ultimately, in our district, we not only ask our instructional coaches to lead and facilitate, like at our early release days, they all have a group that they work with. I have a group that I work with. The coordinators have a group that they work with. They help lead, collaborate, bring information to the teachers, rewrite, design, analyze the curriculum and the data that we're learning from how our kids are performing. They take that lead on so that we don't have to lean on principals and teachers to try to do it in all their fake free time, right? So we're trying to have that be part of our job so that we can help create the conditions basically whereby our teachers and our administrators can do their best work on the ground, as folks say. Another thing we do here in the district is we utilize the instructional coaches as what we're calling systems coaches. So in order to ensure equity and that we are implementing our multi-tiered system of support, which I've given you a narrative about in the past, which another time, another dissertation, you can see that there's a lot of complexity to that piece, especially in partnership with our special education teams under Act 173. So we're using them as partners to the school-based teams, right alongside principals and in a lot of cases, school counselors, to ensure that kids are thriving, that we're looking at universal data and we're seeing what we're doing is working, and then we're seeing where some kids need something else. And so those systems coaches help move that process along pretty well. We're finding a lot of success with that. And then the last thing is the sort of the individual coaching cycles, right? Which is really what we went into this for with our 16.5 FTEs back in 2019. Boy, we must have, I knew we weren't gonna be able to sustain it, but it felt really fun. We thought that they would all be working directly with a teacher in a deep coaching cycle, like in class with them every single day, right alongside team teaching, model teaching. That is definitely happening. But can't possibly to the degree that we have the FTEs to sustain right now. So they are all doing deep coaching cycles. They all work directly with teachers. They're also mentors to new teachers if they're literacy and math. Again, I put that caveat out there a bit. We're still focused on those two academic areas. And so those are their big jobs, right? So a lot of data, a lot of facilitation of resources, deep coaching cycles with teachers, mentoring new teachers, and helping us with that systems piece. I linked for you, and I'm going to stop in a sec. I linked for you an overview of sort of a year at a glance. Our instructional coordinator helped piece that together. I asked for a day in the life, and she was like, "Oh, come on, you got to see sort of, because things ebb and flow, right? When it's assessment time, screening time, or the state assessment time." These folks are also our site coordinators. They work in partnership with our data and assessment coordinator and their assigned educator to make sure. And this year we were monitored by the Agency of Education, still waiting for that report. I imagined if it was bad news, they would have found me by now. But they did a great job making sure that we were implementing that state assessment second time around with fidelity as best we could. And I think we couldn't have pulled that off without their support either. So that's why the overview of kind of a year made a little bit more sense. We did kind of give you a week as at a glance as well. And lastly, I incorporated an example of one of the newsletters. So they put together a monthly newsletter that goes out to the field and to themselves, because again, they have to keep up with their own professional development on a regular basis also. Okay.
Wow, nicely done.
Yeah.
Nicely done.
Daniela?
Yes. So Katrina, I'm coming to you from, right down the road. But I want to say it's so exciting. You're totally speaking my language. And just hearing about the work you're doing with MTSS and UDL, really exciting. And I also really like hearing about the targeted continuous improvement. So I just want to know a little bit more. I know it's late at night, but can you tell us a little bit more about how you're measuring progress? Like what are your targets? Is it just the strategic plan? I know that's phased out. What kinds of expectations do you have to students? And do you have a plan in place for adjusting, given the fact that you've had a lot of turnover? Like basically, what are your accountability systems that you have here for coaching? And sorry if I'm getting too academic in the weeds. This is just one of my favorite things to do and talk about.
So I can answer your questions a couple different ways, unless you want me to.
Daniela, is that something that, and it's a really great question, but wondering for time reasons?
Well, it's also a question that we had quite a few people ask during our meeting. So I just want to make sure that we do get it out there. I know that we're mindful of time, but maybe Katrina, if you can just give us a quick overview about how you are measuring progress or your accountability system, that would be awesome.
So we measure progress in a lot of different ways in terms of student outcomes for kids, right? So you as a board get the ENDS monitoring report every single October. It's based on data from the previous year. I'm sure you've seen them linked, and there's an archive of them on the website as well. And those were based on what the board and committees over the years have interpreted as being measures that we wanted you to be able to see. So you get sort of a higher level view, and because the ENDS policy is really speaking to the end of an experience, you mostly get 6th grade data and 12th grade data. You also get the state assessment data as well, and we've started to expand that out a little bit. It's work that the policy team would like to explore a little bit more. We keep talking about that every year, but now the year's almost over, and so you're going to get the same measures that you got before, but we'll work on that. So that's one way, sort of a big picture view. How are our kids doing? There's a lot of data in there that can answer that question. We also, as an internal team of about 34 of us or so, come together 3 times a year at a trimester level, and we look closely at our local assessment plan data, which is a lot of screeners and some diagnostic assessments. I put that in one of my narratives to the board as well. So you can look into see what that looks like more. And there is a link to the local assessment plan, so you can actually see what those tools are.
I have the strategic plan, but I don't have the local assessment plan unless it's under the Champlain Valley or the district management or the Vermont multi-tiered system of support field guide. So if it's possible that you sent it before I was on the board, please feel free to go ahead and send it to me again, because I would love to get in the weeds with this. And I'm kind of bummed that this is my favorite conversation at so late in the night when I was not totally following all of our finance conversations. But yes, that sounds great.
Where the superintendent's reports are housed, there's a folder called Teaching and Learning. And
Okay.
I think I wrote the local assessment plan one in the fall, in November. So there's a lot in there that you can get into as well.
First, you might
Okay.
need a direction on how to get through the Google Drive.
Any
Okay.
other?
So it sounds like you have a, like, what, a trimester per year, or you have 3 meetings over the course of the year, and that you have a local plan that you have housed on the site. And then I'm sure we'll get a chance to talk more about how you set those targets. I'm just really curious in learning more, since you're doing my favorite work. So I'll stop for the rest of the board since I'm not there and I can't see how tired you are. But I'd say, Katrina, thanks so much for sharing this. I'm looking forward to more conversations.
Just one comment. I know this has come up on a lot of different levels, both from community members that were paying for these extra people and from teachers. And a lot of teachers, when you mention the word coach, roll their eyes. How it looks great in practice, right? If the teachers aren't feeling, and I can't speak for all of them, just the 10 or so that I've come across. How do we work on that? How do we improve those relationships between the coaches? And you don't have to answer this right now, but it's a big question that has come up a lot, I think, for many of us. So
Yeah, a few years ago, real quick, we did actually start creating some testimonials and some interviews, and actually created our own sort of screencastify, if you will, that we really did have teachers who were engaging in this work with coaches speak to the difference it had made in their classrooms. I don't promote us doing that all of the time. It feels like we're trying to defend 8 people's positions when there are 100 student-facing positions. So if students aren't meeting the outcomes that we've set forward, it can't just be because of those 8. So we need to be looking at what everybody's doing and how we're building a culture for and continuous improvement together. So I think when we see eye rolling, it's most likely because it's not somebody that's engaged very closely with a coach or has had a negative experience for whatever reason. But most often, that's why I was emphasizing, there is really a small number of teachers who in our district who work directly with a coach because of their expertise in math and literacy, because we can only prioritize so much. So I don't have a coach for PE. I don't have a coach for design and tech or world language or for the EAs even. So it's likely because they haven't necessarily experienced the things that other folks have.
Katrina, I'm wondering, sorry to pop back in here, but I'm wondering, in hearing what Ashley said, is if it might be helpful, because I saw the testimonials and I thought they're really interesting and I love qualitative data, but I'm also wondering if it might be more helpful for community members to be able to see the outcomes. Like if you're doing MTSS and you're collecting all that data, which it sounds like you guys have a really robust data collection system, being able to share that out, even in like the principal reports, I think that would really help. Like some of this is just a matter of messaging, just explain to folks, like, look at the outcomes that we're getting and how we're moving students. I think that would buy a lot of enthusiasm for the work that you're doing. And so I just want to recommend that, of giving other forms of data on the coaching would be phenomenal.
Any other questions on the coaching model for tonight? So we're gonna take your time looking through this, look through it online. I mean, obviously, there's a ton more information we can dig into and will, right? This is the first stop on many stops, so don't think of this as the end point. It's not the end all be all. We have lots of admin support here to help us, so we'll keep going with it.
I really appreciate all of the information that's been collected in a really easy to understand format, and it's so readily available. I really appreciate it.
it's like the new board member training that
Yeah,
everybody
never
wants
got.
to create.
I've got a file started. All right, next thing in our board management and governance, or it's board management and governance. And the first thing is a discussion about the community input. Daniela had started putting teams together, and I've also started putting teams together from the Survey Monkey one. And Daniela took New Haven, Bristol, and Moncton's input because we didn't have Robinson at the time. So Daniela, if you would just want to hit like big thematic items in the.
Yeah, do you want me to share my screen?
If Patrick.
Let me see if I can set that up for you.
Oh, I can, it says that I can. So let's see if that works. Can y'all see my screen?
We can, yep.
Awesome. It's almost like I have to teach online. Okay, so what I want to tell everybody here, everybody who's online, this is a draft. This is based on me trying to work as quickly as possible, but also as researchery as possible. So what I've done is I've come up with a really high level across lots of phenomenal notes that everybody took. And I'd say some of these things we've already heard today, and I'm happy to, once we have a more final draft, share this out. So it's not complete. But based on what I saw so far is that it feels like, as Erin already mentioned, that community members are worried and hurt and angry about the state of education, and that there's a real desire for having a school district that everybody is feeling really proud about, that's accessible and safe to all children, and that's a reasonable cost to taxpayers, which is apparently the first part of our end statement. So that's good that the community has the same ideas and mindset as what we came up with before I was here. But one of the things that really struck me from having done this work in other communities is how consistently we were hearing from community members who believe in this work and want to be able to support and strengthen the educational system. They were really looking for more collaboration, and I found that so positive. So here, the big picture. I know that not all of this is going to feel really lovely when receiving it, but I think it's important that we start with where we are. So community members expressed significant widespread lack of trust in the board and central office administration. So that's where we are. That's where I think we thought that we were, that we really had broken trust, and that there was a lot more desire to see the work of the board engage more with community collaboration. Another piece that felt really important was that this community values and prioritizes the work of teachers and educational staff, and they really want to see that reflected in the budget. And that was so powerful, and I think it's part of the reason why the RIFs hit so hard for folks, is because knowing that teachers are so important to this community, then having the RIFs put out completely understanding the reasoning behind it, it just hit harder than I think possibly some other things might have that came through. And that there were a lot of requests to really be able to make sure that we protect teachers and educators and the specialists in this next budget cycle. What surprised me personally, but probably shouldn't have, is that while we heard from folks, and particularly some communities more so than others, that the budget needs to be reasonable for taxpayers, overwhelmingly people were more concerned about the substance of the budget and how that's communicated out. And I put a quote on here that I thought was a really good one. I would vote yes if I have the confidence that the money is being spent well in the right ways, because that was something that we saw and heard over and over again. And so it felt like it was this combination about communication. Folks want more details. Patrick, I know you'll be thrilled to hear this, but they want like a 2-pager flyer without color on it, detailing the new budget when it gets mailed out. And also we saw that the third budget vote timeline shouldn't be rushed. This didn't come across in every single group, but a substantial number of communities reported out that they were okay with missing the July 1st deadline and borrowing in order to make sure that the budget would really be clear and specific and align with these core values. And if this is helpful, our big budget priorities for funding, what I was seeing across the board were teachers, special educators, and staff working with children, special education services for all children, and making sure schools have the resources they need to address behavioral issues, because it was definitely this feeling of like one child can't affect a whole classroom. Now, we've heard that all tonight. We've heard it before, but we can just say from a lot of different folks, these seem to be the things people were like, if you're going to spend money, please put your money here. Things that they weren't as excited about spending money on, and I had a lot of trouble figuring out what to call this, but it was sort of like, could you please not spend more money here? Central office admin and instructional coaches that, of course, we've talked about more tonight. Constructions and facilities, purchasing the central office building keeps coming back. I'm just reporting out. I know that we've had lots of these conversations and extra services that are not necessary to learning. However, I just want to name people have lots of different ideas about what's necessary for learning, but that is something that came up in some of the communities. And I think the last few things I want to add is that there is a lot of conversation about policy governance and wanting more engagement with the board and whether or not that had to do with policy governance. Some folks talked about, I think every meeting had at least a few folks talk about the Levinson report and consolidation options. And then there was a lot of conversation about communication, oversight, and transparency in the district. Now, if you came to one of these meetings, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll send this out to everybody. But if you came to one of these meetings, we have so much more information. And I want to make sure that you know that your voice was heard and the specific information you gave us has been captured. But I just want to get into the like big headlines that we could share out tonight. If you weren't able to go to one of those meetings, there's still time for you to complete a survey. And I just also wanted to say, it's really hard to get people to come out to board meetings, even when there's a lot going on in failed budgets. It's a problem across country. And I was struck by how many people came and how many people gave their time and really engaged in the spirit of collaboration. And I just have tremendous gratitude for the community of folks who've been engaging in this work. And I want to say thank you because it's been really great to hear from everyone that I've talked with so far. And I'm guessing, I can't see anybody else in the room, but I'm guessing it was probably a good experience from other folks from what I've heard. And I'm happy to share out that information in another format. And I just want to remind everybody, this is just a draft. It can still be revised. Any questions?
Well, yeah, we can share it out and then as it grows, we can continue to share it out. But just to sort of echo what Daniela put together, I've gone through the Survey Monkey, which is an anonymous survey, so I don't see anything except what people write. And I've been trying to theme as well. That's a little bit more tough because there's a wide range of stuff.
How many responses?
We have 206 responses, which is more than I thought we would get. And I hope to leave it open so that we can continue to collect on that. I'm not sure that I'm not sure that's the last of what we should keep it open for. I think maybe as we're working through this, we keep it open more, but right now, in question 1, the 3 most common words that were used so question 1 is what you want the board to know right now. And the 3 most common words were needs, students, and teachers. Interesting. Those are closely followed by budget, school, and community, which is great, right? Those should be in there. So the top 3 things that we're worried about what they want us to know is about the needs, about students, about teachers. In the second question, which is what would it take to make you feel more positive about the budget? The top 3 words again were need, budget, and cut, which is interesting. Closely followed by teachers, school, and students. So, out of those top 12 words, 10 are the same. Right, so it's pretty clear that the priorities are kids, teachers, budgets, and needs. And that the things around those priorities include cuts and where they come from and our community. So I'm not done data mining and there's a lot still to go through. But a lot of big feelings collected in that survey. I would like to find a really delicate way to express some of that, what we're hearing, so that we can all acknowledge that too. But yeah, any questions between so far what we've come up with for thematic interest? Okay. That's what we have so far. Any other discussion about community input?
I think in New Haven anyway, it was far less about the tax increase and much more about how we're spending the money. That was pretty clear, and I think it was clear in other towns as well, which is good information to know. That's part of what we wanted to know. And it was really positive feedback from those who attended of just being like, thanks for doing this, thanks for being here, thanks for listening. So it does feel good to feel like maybe we're making some baby steps towards rebuilding that trust and that dialogue, and understanding what everybody needs.
We talked a lot about transparency, the need for transparency, especially around budgets. And making sure, you know, that one-page flyers are really nice, but they miss going back to the old, almost like the annual report, so you know what the line item is and you know what, you don't need all 1,800 of them, trust me, but more of what we did tonight is what they'd really like to see. And be able to understand for themselves where their money is going.
And
Yeah.
dumbing it down
Hearing
a
you
little.
both, sorry,
Hold on
hearing
one
you both
second.
talk,
Hold on a second,
my-
Danielle,
I was just gonna say, coming from Moncton and today too, I heard the same thing. And, you know, even to the point where, are we gonna do this monthly?
Yeah.
So,
Right, go ahead, Danielle.
I'm so sorry. Y'all are really tiny and I couldn't tell who was talking. And Barb, I'm sorry I spoke over you. What I want to say is hearing you talk about your individual communities is one thing that struck me. I was expecting to see different ideas in different communities, and that really didn't happen. Like it really, the things that were said in one town were consistent across them. There were almost no like surprises or somebody who had an idea that was completely different from everybody else. So I found that to be also really powerful in terms of our message. So everything that you're saying and that you're hearing is repeated across our district. I'm sorry. Are we a district or are we a supervisory union? I'm so sorry to be asking this. My brain stopped working about 20 minutes ago. We're a district, right?
We were both, actually. We,
Oh.
district is, there is still a supervisory union structure that's more financial at the state level, but for all intents and purposes, we're a district.
So I think our greatest challenge, Danielle, and thank you and Aaron for pulling all that data together. I think our greatest challenge is to take what we've all heard and move forward with it. And I think that's gonna make the difference in whether or not we're able to ever pass a budget, is by being able to be clear and concise and responsible. That's what they're asking for. That's what we should be asking ourselves for as taxpayers.
We did come up with what seemed like a brilliant idea of taking what we went through tonight, the budget that's a little more manageable to understand, and having Floyd like webinar, so people could just tune in and he could explain it and go through it. Because a lot of people were like, ugh, it's just so much, and it is.
But to do the buckets like you did.
Yeah.
Tonight, yeah.
And somebody also was talking a lot about somebody who manages big budgets in a different profession, was talking about what is fixed and what is not. And that's not always clear, but very important.
What's discretionary?
Right.
Like salaries, health insurance, like those things are kind of what they are.
Transition from, we're sort of doing it naturally, but okay, so how do we move forward, right? And one of our action items is setting a date for a budget vote. And we had two dates sort of earmarked, June 11th and June 18th. Someone was saying June 11th, one of you told me June 11th felt better because people are really concerned about, and Patrick has already said this too, leaving after, like, families just leaving when school's done and not being around, which is also my chief concern for waiting until July 1, or farther. So what are we thinking as far as an action for setting a date for a budget vote?
We heard the
What the-
opposite in our meeting. We heard people say that they thought that that was not entirely accurate. I don't know if people leave or not. So I'll just say there was some pushback on that.
There was a question at the last meeting, I think maybe Steve asked it about, what's the window of time needed from the warning to the budget in order for absentee ballots to happen? And the information we've gotten is that 3 weeks is ideal. So if we're in that range, then that would work.
Right, so how does that? When we sort of did a proposal last time. We were going to try to give you some feedback at some point. Which was going to lead to a draft budget coming back to us. Which we would either say okay to or ask you to redraft it. I think we added the meeting on the 21st to accommodate that. Following that sort of sequence. And working it backwards again, does that say the 18th at this point?
No, the way I mapped it out, if tonight there's a target set. And next week, I present a budget that hits that target. And that budget's adopted and the warning and the ballot are approved. Then 3 weeks from that would be the June 11th. It'd be 1 day less than 3 weeks because we'd be warning it on a Wednesday and be voting on a Tuesday, but.
Right, but if we don't set a target tonight.
Then that means you would set a target next week.
Yeah.
And then I would come on the 28th, and now we're looking at the 18th instead of the 11th.
Right. So just so everybody's clear.
Yeah. Can you refresh my memory of the $500,000 that we talked about 2 meetings ago? The reduction was.
And you'd also then come up with some other, right?
Come up with some other figure.
Was there a 1.5 path?
Yeah, so I've left
in
open.
addition to the 500?
Yeah, so that's where not filling some positions is I'm waiting in the event that I need greater reduction than that 578 or whatever it was. I'm just pulling up the details now. One of the things that didn't get to happen tonight, so part of that 578,000 or so was not filling 2.3 FTE special educator positions. Part of what Beth was prepared to present tonight was a little bit about the robust system of supports we have for meeting students' needs, including students on IEPs. And how even with that 2.3 being not filled, that we would still have a strong system of support. So you don't have that background knowledge behind that now. So in addition to, so everything that was a reduction for the April 16th vote obviously would be in place. In addition to that, getting to this next slide. So we would be not filling 1.0 math instructional coach. That would be an additional reduction for the third budget. 0.6 guidance counselor would not be filled. 0.4 social worker, that's someone who wants to reduce their time anyway. So we would just not go out to try and fill that 0.4 vacancy. 2.3 special educator positions. And then there were sort of a series of reduced costs related to reduced anticipated student needs. So reduced out of district placement costs, reduced interpreter costs, reduced special education travel costs, and reduced physical therapy costs. And all of that totaled $576,914 in additional savings through attrition, not needing refs.
I think what we heard very clearly last night is special ed and individual assistants or classroom assistants or behavioral interventionists is never an area that we should cut, given the culture that we're in right now and the needs of the students that we have.
And I would argue that the knowledge of the general community doesn't come close to what the Director of Student Support Services knows about each and every single student on an IEP and what their needs are and what's needed to meet those needs. And Beth is saying we can absorb 2.3 special educator positions. So that's the challenge, right? So it's easy if we just sort of take a vote of the community and I just do what the majority of the community wants. Or I can listen to the people that are working with the kids day in and day out and what we need for services to meet those needs and wrestle with that and the financial realities.
I'm really just struggling with the disconnect. And I realized we didn't get to hear Beth's presentation, or whatever we want to call it tonight. But the disconnect between what you just said and what Beth was going to present and what we hear from our teachers and our parents and our students is so vast. I don't know how to reconcile that. Like, it's like you're on different continents. I don't understand how our children and our teachers and our parents are experiencing something so different than what is being brought here. It's really upsetting. And it's also not what I've experienced. So I'm really struggling.
Thank you. Thank you.
I need to step away from it.
Yeah, that's okay. That, and are people feeling like it's something we need to maybe get a little bit of information on tonight? Or is there?
It's 10 o'clock.
I
I
know,
can't
I'm
absorb
just-
anything else. I think
Well-
I would love to have you present next week. Take some more time next week.
Patrick, can you break
Listen
that
to it.
down a little bit? Before, you might not be able to do it right now, but can you break it down into what the savings would be if we didn't fill the math coach and the special ed savings from not having to offer those services? What those two things, so leaving the social worker.
About 200,000.
200.
If we're only not filling the math instructional coach and the additional savings from those sort of 4 buckets, that's in the neighborhood of 200,000.
So I'm wondering, like, is there a
Somewhere
compromise?
between, yeah.
Is there a compromise there? If people are saying it's not so much the tax burden, for some people it is, I'm not discrediting that. But for many people that we've heard from, it's not so much the tax burden and hike, it's the services that they want to see. So leaving those services intact, and hopefully we can fill them. We might not be able to, that's a possibility. We know that a math coach isn't working with kids, and we know that special ed savings is there.
Considerable. Yeah.
I wonder if there's like or maybe we don't fill the 0.3% special ed and keep 2 full-time spots open or something of that nature.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think it has to be one or the other. What's the middle?
One of the problems is gonna be that if the $500,000 or whatever cuts is all attributed to attrition, that's just not necessarily gonna be understood by the voters. They're gonna see that as cutting teachers, even, and so I'm wondering, is there someplace else in the budget that, I mean, like, where we can, maybe we do have to look at attrition partly, but are any other places in the budget that are not related to student services that we can cut some funds out of? Because that's, we heard that, they said at Starksboro, they were worried about that. We're just sort of using attrition to get to a budget that would be acceptable. And whether that, we're thereby cutting educational corners.
Yeah, I think, and that's part of the challenge too, right? Like, I mean, we've lost, and you saw some of the enrollment data, right? We've lost hundreds of students. So the idea that we never lose student-facing positions as we lose hundreds of students,
Right.
like we haven't lost buildings.
Right.
We haven't lost responsibilities of central office and grant management and all the things that come out of Montpelier that need to be managed and all of that. We haven't lost in any of those areas, but we've lost hundreds of students. So it stands to reason that we would be losing student-facing positions as we lose hundreds of students. Exactly what that right ratio is and which positions and at what timing and what way, there's all kinds of nuance to that, but I don't understand that disconnect either.
I totally agree with
Yeah.
you, you're right, but that's not what's gonna come across.
Right.
They're gonna see, well, we're still have $2 million in the construction budget. We're still, you have talking about Munsell Avenue, or talking about, the the entryway cost overruns, and that's what they're gonna,
Yep.
that people are gonna react to. So I think just, you know, politically, we need to be able to demonstrate in the third iteration of the budget that, yeah, maybe we have to look at attrition because of student enrollment. But here are some things in the admin or central office or construction area that we can take from to reduce the tax burden.
Yeah, I mean, the next place that I would go is that construction services line, and
Yeah.
then we're not going to have the money there to do whatever that needs. One of the things that's been on my mind, PCB testing did not get paused. That's happening. I
Nor
have
did it
no
get
idea what that's
funded.
gonna tell us, and there's no money from the state to cover the cost. It's risky, yeah.
It is a risk. I mean,
Yeah.
you're right.
But I wonder if it's in some ways a short-term risk, a sign of good faith to the community. I mean, I don't, if it really isn't about the total number, then probably whatever target we come up with isn't actually all that different. We're not talking $5 million different. But instead is a olive branch on the short term, that we're hearing community feedback, knowing full well that that shortcut this year might not be the shortcut that one could take in the future. That the consequences of that shortcut year in and year out might be far worse than maybe what you were originally proposing. But with the idea being, I think as we've been messaging to the community, and I hope is resonating, that these conversations have to be seen as a starting point, right? A long-term collaborative effort. And maybe with that extra time, there may be more understanding of what supports we have for special needs in the district, to what extent they're meeting those, like ways that we can kind of build support for maybe reduction in staff through attrition, if that's then the kind of sentiment more broadly, because there is more time for understanding, if that makes sense. Again, I'm hesitant, but thinking in the short term versus the long term, maybe there's some middle ground there that we can then all kind of work forward to.
Recognize that short term means if the thought is we'll reduce this line item this year, increasing it next year in a environment of decreasing students and increasing costs is a really difficult position next year. So I would say we're not, if we take it out, it's going to be really difficult to put it back in. Knowing what's happening going forward with funding streams, student streams, and expense streams. And then you stretch that back to 4 years ago, 5 years ago, when we projected our issue is we have all of these campuses that are fixed costs that we have to supply people, heat, all that infrastructure cost for. And the choice was made back then, keep the buildings with the knowledge that at some point we're going to be here today. So we're here today and we can eliminate the construction line. Absolutely we can. And we're going to be here next year. And what's the cut next year?
I think I agree, Floyd, although I think my response to that would be, it feels like right now there is broad community sentiment that they're not ready for certain cuts.
Sure, I agree.
In this day, right? And there are more, right, and again, I share Patrick's hesitation that I would like the people who have boots on the ground and who know what they're like, whose job it is to do this, to be leading the ship. But I wonder if over the next year you have time to make the argument for why that's the way the ship really should be led moving forward. An argument that probably doesn't have time over the next 3 weeks to be heard. Right, and so in some ways it's a way of working iteratively, meeting people where they are to begin with, or at least closer to where they are, so that you buy time as a board and as a district to make the case that we want to make moving forward. Because it seems like with 2 failed budget votes and the thematic analysis that we've seen so far, we failed to make the case today.
That's helpful for me to think about it as a stopgap measure, not as a long-term plan.
Yeah, I was gonna just mimic exactly what Mike just said.
Yeah.
And we have to see what our facts are in front of us right now. I think it's a subtle maneuver to leave special educators and to take some construction budget. For what that's worth, it's not really a large amount of money either way, but it says the right message for the short term. And we make a better case, we work on maybe a bond in the fall for the construction stuff. Because I don't think we've done a good job of pushing the bond topic. We had two $30 million bonds fail for reasons where we didn't really make big adjustments to that picture. I think we might have been able to pass a $5 or $10 million bond at the time, but we never went that road. We could do that now, I think, and people would see it makes more sense. And that would maybe move it out of the construction budget and leave that for staffing issues.
Are we kicking the can down the road that we really need to look at consolidation of schools? We can't continue to keep these schools open, and I think
That might be the case, but we can't do that in the next.
we can't
week or
know.
two.
What I'm saying is that this is the groundwork that has to be done to prove that, okay, yeah, we can save $500,000 here. We don't want to take it out of special ed. We don't want to take it out of boots on the ground, because, you know, when I hear that we've got 21 clear the halls at Beaman every year, or so far this year, I'm with you. I'm really upset it doesn't add up here. Let's look at how much these buildings are costing us compared to the well-being and the safety of the children in our classrooms. You know, we've got to make that comparison
Great
now,
work.
and it's blatant.
Great work for the fall.
Yeah,
Liz.
absolutely.
I would like for us to be inspired to get to a place where we're putting something on the ballot in November. And this conversation has me thinking about that. I think we could get there. We may not be able to get there in 3 weeks. I'm not for a budget. I mean, for like a change structurally. Maybe PCB testing could be done by then. If we have a building we have to evacuate for PCB reasons, there you go, right? So whatever we can do, I think that, because in November, if we knew that we had a change that was significant enough for us to be able to, in budget development for next March, there could be a vote in November that would help us feel secure with our choices in the development of next year's budget. If we can keep pushing the way we're pushing right now to get information, to have something in November that's significant, which will already be a high turnout vote. So that's what this is all making me think. And also, I feel like I've only been met with surprise and concern that we haven't chosen a date. That's what I've been met with. And even if we don't know, I understand the working backwards and that puts pressure on us. But even if we don't know our target and we don't have the warning done, we know we're going to vote in March. Even though we don't know what we're going to be voting on, we know there will be a vote then. And I think it's okay to pick a date, even without the flyer being filled out and knowing what will be on it. It feels really important to pick a date because it's something. I don't know that it.
It's just.
And I don't know how we come about setting a target. Yeah. Sorry, Steve. Thank you.
It sort of sounds like we've come to this place where it's really important that we're taking what the community has said and we're putting that into practice. So what I'm hearing right now is that we would really like at least 2 of those special educator positions to be saved. And by means of another pot of money, perhaps construction services. There was another 3 or 4 positions on that list you read that were also student facing. are we just sticking to, we'd really like to see those 2 special educators stay? I mean, there's one that's a reduction that they're a willing reduction, right? The person would like to reduce their time spent student facing.
I social worker too.
Yeah, I keep thinking about Sarah Mangini's comment about 4th grade teacher
Mhm.
that's leaving. Is that position going away? It's going to be
Yeah,
renewed?
that's, well,
That's,
It wasn't
That's-
on that list. of
okay.
things.
That's what I
Right,
wanted to
so-
make
so
sure,
the-
yeah.
There are
'Cause
3.
I think that's a concern. so-
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm caught, and Katrina, no offense to you and your beautiful presentation,
That's
but
what
I'm
everyone says to the coaches.
I'm caught between this. The public wants the people on the ground employed working with our kids. And we need district people doing all of the legalities and checks and balances to make sure that we're doing what we need. And for me, the in-between middle is the coaches, where they're neither part of those 2 pots that are kind of being put on a pedestal in terms of budgeting purposes by both the public and the administration. And so I'm questioning if that's a place, if we're gonna make an alternative cut and not take out special ed, if it makes more sense to look at reducing the coaches.
just to clarify, we are reducing 2.
One. Oh, one
in the
from the
previous drafts,
previous,
and now a second one.
second one. Okay, thank you.
So
That's
just,
2 out of 7.
so if-
There's 9
are
left.
they under teachers' contract?
Mhm.
So what happens is you might have a bumping scenario, right? Because some of them have seniority. And so teachers that are in the classrooms, if they have less seniority, will be bumped.
I wonder also too, if we want to be careful in terms of expressing priorities, so right, like broadly, like concern about, special education, right? But then not being prescriptive for how Patrick finds those other cuts, right? And so I think we do want to be careful not to say like, get rid of this, keep this and get rid of this specific thing, right? I think it would be better as a board for us to be able to say, we see concerns expressed here from the community that there are priorities of support here. We'd like you to reduce the budget by this while maintaining those supports. Does that make sense? So making very goal oriented rather than very specific piecemeal cuts, because then I think we might be closer to overstepping our authority. Which we may already be doing, frankly, but.
Well, that is the challenge, right? Is at what point, like the more the board directs me how to achieve the ends, the less responsibility I hold for the outcomes.
Yes.
The more the board gives me the authority to direct the ends, but the means to achieve the ends, the more the board holds me accountable for those outcomes. And so that's the line we're trying to walk a little bit right now.
But I
that
think
Mike
also we have to take this whole consideration of the lack of trust that the communities have in the current administration being able to manage it. And I think that's what the message is that I've taken away. I don't know about you, Ashley, but that they want the board to do exactly this.
They want us to manage it?
Yep, they want us to give more direction to exactly what needs to be cut in the budget.
But haven't we by bringing their voice clearly to the table?
No, yeah, we have not.
But I don't,
There needs action. We need action more than just hearing them.
Yeah, but
I am,
I don't think Mike is discussing not taking action.
Mhm.
But I don't want to micromanage exactly which people either. I mean, I would prefer myself to give a broad statement about it. We want to keep student-facing folks, especially those in, social and emotional positions, if we can. And we would prefer the balance to come out of some other bucket that we can address in the fall in some other fashion.
Are we all in agreement, though, that the driver is not the final number, but rather what is actually reduced? So in other words, can we say with $500,000 on the table, are we, as a board, are we comfortable with reducing the budget by $500,000 and then letting Patrick come up with a
Iteration of it.
proposal on combination of attrition and taking funds from other places in the budget?
Can you remind me what
That is, that is responsive to what the community input has provided us.
could you remind me the tax impact
Yeah.
of that? Roughly, like 7 point.
Yeah,
something
that,
or-
so at the 578 or whatever the number was, that brought, basically the range was more like 4 to 7% increase post CLA. Which is historically right in where we've passed budgets in the last 5 years.
So I'd be perfectly fine with that as a sort of rough target number for the historical reason. And the fact that I think we could point to, I think the yield, I heard maybe.
Yield ticked up a little bit, that'll help some.
Yeah, that'll help. And then I think they said statewide, the average is now projected about 13.8, if I'm pulling a number that I heard.
I've heard a lot of different numbers, I don't know which one it is.
13.9. So, but maybe they do something in that ballpark, but essentially what we'd be saying is our increase is kind of historical in line with what we had, and it's half of what the rest of the state, I like that round message of we've cut, and we're half of what most communities around the state are going to experience with this budget.
We're already the lowest spending per pupil in Addison County. That was sort of to Alan's comment earlier, that was a question that he had.
Also super useful to know. Thanks.
So, yeah, I
But
mean,
again, I don't know if that is what our voters are necessarily looking for. That wasn't clear in New Haven. I don't know.
We were there for 45 minutes and we were the ones that raised the tax issue last night.
You're like, nobody's
So,
talked about the tax.
What your tax rate? And they all kind of went, oh yeah, well that.
I will put that in
It's
context,
interesting.
Addison County is one of the highest spending counties per pupil in the state, so put that in context, so we're. MAUSD, and this was in the April 16th version of the budget. We were in the very bottom of the top 25% cost per pupil in the state, but we're lowest in Addison County.
so just, yeah, go ahead, Steve.
Well, to say that the money doesn't matter is a little bit of a head scratcher because
Yeah.
budgets didn't a third of the budgets didn't fail the last 5 years. They failed because we hit double-digit tax increases. And the people that I've been hearing from on Front Porch Forum and stuff, those folks are pissed about the money. They're also pissed about these other things. But I think the reason why this all blew up was because the tax rates got crazy. So I'm not make some nod towards the dollars here. I think we might be in around 3 or 4.
If we don't, yeah. So sort of with all that information in mind. So 2 actions on the table, right? Starting with setting a date for the budget vote. What do we think about that? But that sort of feeds into what the second one is set the budget target, which, do people feel like this 500K give or take is where we're at in terms of giving Patrick the go ahead to give us a budget target with 570, whatever it was, saving the student facing positions and figuring out where else monies might come.
How did we get to the 500K?
That was what was already in that set of reductions that Patrick listed earlier.
Right.
Which gives us that 4 to 7% tax increase with the CLI.
Yeah, it was a combination of just sort of attrition that presented itself and mitigating the tax burden that was a factor that has been discussed as well, as Steve pointed out. And so bringing the tax rate post CLA down to basically where it's been in recent years seemed to mitigate that as much as we could. That sort of combination of those 2 things is what brought that about.
Okay. So it wasn't just us shooting a number out there, but it was actually grounded in what was happening.
Well, and I think out of typical practice, given desperate times calling for desperate measures, I brought that concept to you without you requesting it of me. at our last meeting to try and offer some assistance.
Thank you.
So if we set a budget target for tonight, then to me, the date would be June 11th. If we don't, and we don't feel prepared to do that, and we have to push to next meeting, to me, the date is the 18th. So if we're willing to, I don't know if this is setting a budget target. It kind of is.
I can work with the loose targets. Give me something to work with.
I think we have to move things forward.
Yeah, let's get. I think the main thing is to set a target along the lines of what we're discussing. I'm comfortable with whether it's June 11th or June 18th. Doesn't matter. I really am not agnostic about that.
The only way that matters much is there's, I think, a pretty significant difference in the ability for one more vote in June if it's the 11th or 18th. So to whatever extent that matters, that's the biggest thing. If it's the 18th, I think it's quite unlikely that another June vote would happen. If it's the 11th, I think there's a reasonable chance that it could.
Okay.
Is there a possibility, I don't know if this is legal, but can you give us your proposal before the meeting? So we have like Tuesday morning, so we have some time just to digest it. Sometimes when we come to meetings and the information is dropped on us, we're like, so if, I mean, I don't need a ton of advance notice, but like.
Round
Tuesday
3 is
morning?
easier.
Okay.
In part because so much has been built and so many of the figures that are usually moving on a daily basis are set. So
It would be helpful just to have us wrap our brains around it. So when we come, we can be really thoughtful.
yeah, oftentimes the afternoon of prior budget presentations, Floyd and I are working with new information we got that day to try to bring you the most up-to-date information. So, but that's less of a thing now.
Tuesday at 1 is good.
So let's pick a date.
Well, I'm fine with keeping the budget reduction number Patrick proposed with the feedback we've had for juggling the short-term implications of that. Which means I think we could set it for the 11th.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so June 11th for revote?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Ooh.
Okay.
Motion.
I make a
Yeah.
motion to set the new budget revote for June 11th.
I second.
All those in favor of setting the date for budget revote on June 11th, 2024, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Hi.
Any abstentions? Motion passes. An action to set the budget target.
Make a motion to set a budget target of $575,000 less than the current failed budget.
Second.
Sorry. I might suggest can you make that in a positive way? What is the number?
Give me,
Patrick, if you could-
yep.
Sure.
You think we could get away with a straight 5 or does it have to be 575?
I like the fact that it's almost 6.
Okay.
And is there any more collaborations we can do out of the central office that will reduce the central office line items?
Patrick's looking up that number, Steve, I think. Am I correct? And he wanted to say, to set a budget target in the amount of while preserving student facing positions, was that part of the conversation?
Yes.
Or something like that.
So the prior budget was 35,957,401. Subtracting 575,000 from that is 35,382,401. Just so you can read it for the motion.
I got the same.
So I'll make a motion to set a new budget target of $35,382,401. While maintaining as many student-facing positions as possible, finding other short-term savings.
Second.
Brad second.
Brad, all those in favor of that new budget target with the accompanying reason? Please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, that motion passes. We have another public comment section.
Before we go
What?
to that,
Mhm.
I have a question. So what is our plan? We set the date.
Mhm.
What is our plan for setting out information?
Yep, so we'll have next meeting to adopt the budget formally, to approve warnings and the ballot. We can also talk about flyers and other things at that time, now that we know we have something set.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. I don't think we finished building that agenda because we weren't exactly sure of what was gonna unfold tonight. Okay,
Yay, thanks.
mhm.
Shauna again. So that was a lot. One feedback, when we're doing conversations about community engagement, it would just be so great if we actually had engagement at the time, because I guarantee there was other people, and me included, that have really important things that could like help clarify things for you guys as far as what the public is asking for. I've heard from a lot of people, so I could tell you pretty much what they're asking for. One thing that I think it's really important, people need to understand, we're talking about two different things here. We're talking about a budget, which is here and now, but we're talking about policy governance, which is a much bigger issue. And the one thing that could solve all of these issues is if we had a change in the policy, because right now, none of this matters. Because Patrick does not need approval to deficit spend. He said it himself. He doesn't need approval to deficit spend. So deciding where these allocations are doesn't matter, because he can spend where he needs to spend anyway. And he can, and he has done that. So none of this makes any difference unless we change the policy. This is power that the board, the old board gave Patrick the power to not need approval for certain things in the policies. So he doesn't get it, and he's not breaking the rules because he is going by what the policy gives him the power to do. So you as the board can change that. You gave the power, you can take it away. That is what has to change, because that is what the community is saying. They are not comfortable where things are spent, but if he doesn't need approval to spend it a certain way, then we're gonna continue being uncomfortable, and next year we're probably gonna be here again wondering like, how the heck did this happen? Because the policy is the same. Okay, that was a big one. I would like to see reasonable assurance that that's gonna change. Not just before deficit spending, but before encumbering the expenses, because just because you haven't spent it yet, doesn't mean you can't plan to spend it, and I wanna make sure that that is done so that an unbudgeted purchase in certain categories can't be done without, or encumbering them without actually talking to the board. There's a reason why the law says that school boards are supposed to manage the construction bidding process. Because for us, you guys as a board not to know what projects are happening and how much they're costing is not acceptable to me. It's not acceptable in the rules of what the government says too, because school board, all of you, this is an open setting. What happens in the central office is behind closed doors, and therefore nobody has any idea. And that's where things go awry. A transparent governance means that the government officials act openly with citizens' knowledge of the decisions the officials are making. Availability of information on government policies and actions, a clear sense of organizational responsibility, and an assurance that governments are efficiently administered and free of systemic corruption are important components of transparent governance. Transparency is a fundamental element of abolishing corruption. Transparent governance is important to local governments and the communities they serve because corruption threatens good governance, leads to the misallocation of resources, harms public and private sector development, and distorts public policy. Controlling corruption is only possible when government, citizens, and the private sector cooperate to ensure transparency. I'll wrap it up. I know I will be requesting all of this information, all of the finances, all that stuff. I'm gonna be requesting it anyway, just as a heads up, Floyd. So if you guys don't go ahead and put it out, then I'm gonna be doing it anyway, and it'd be better just to put it out so I don't have to make it in a format people understand. It's better just to do it yourselves unless you want me to do it. I'm happy to. I'll volunteer my time, honestly, because people need to see it. And they need to know that what they're saying and what they're seeing can be trusted. We need to know what the capital plans are. We need to be able to see what their priorities are and see what information you're using to make this data. That's what people are asking for. And we're not gonna be able to trust you until we see that's happening. Thank you.
Courtney?
Hi, can you hear me? I really appreciate the discussion tonight. I know it's been a very long night for everybody. I appreciate the emotion that has happened amongst the board with discussions. I feel like it would be, and I know everybody is so busy, but to really understand and grasp why the community really feels like the student, the personnel that's involved with the students one-on-one daily, is such a big issue and needs to stay. I would really implore all of you on the board, and I can only speak to Bristol because that's where my students are at, that's where I'm at, to go in and spend a whole day, 2 days, 3 days in the kindergarten, in the first grade, in the third grade, in the fourth grade, in the fifth grade, and definitely in the sixth grade. Like, if you spend 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, one entire week, 1 day in each grade, you will start to understand why the community is so bent on needing to keep these positions and needing to add extra staff. I know you hear about it. I know there's rumors around around all the community. But until you're there and see it on the daily every day, you don't get the full impact, not only what it's doing to the teachers, but the kids that are being dysregulated, the other kids that are in the class, the learning that's not going on. And I really would really like to see all of you go into your prospective schools or just go into Bristol and see that, and you might fully understand why it is such just drilling in to you guys that that's where the money needs to be spent, that is top priority. And it's not saying that maintenance and all of that is not a priority. It is. It's just at this point in time, the students need all the money that they can get to get the help and get the benefits of being in school that they can. So I really, in your spare time, because I know everybody's busy, if you could just find time to go in and sit for a day in a class, specifically in Bristol, all of them but second grade, but first grade, third grade, and sixth grade, just to see what's going on and realize why it is so important that boots on the ground, one-on-one, people that deal with these students is of the utmost importance. Thanks. Thanks for all you guys did this evening. It's really appreciated.
Sarah?
Well, I learned a ton tonight. I think a lot of people did. And I jotted a few notes down. Something that was new for me is I actually hadn't heard of Title II funds before, or 2A. I had to look that one up to see the distinction between Title II and Title I funds. And, and from what I could see, Title II helps prepare, train, and recruit high quality principals and teachers. And I guess it's called supporting effective instruction. I've had in the past, I've been more familiar with Title I funds, and those provide support directly to struggling students. It's what in the past used to support reading intervention, supplemental reading instruction. We've seen those programs cut tremendously, not in a way that's proportionate to how many students we've lost. We now have interventionists who maybe work with 2 students in each grade in reading. two students in each grade in math, when the actual need is much greater. So I need to respectfully disagree. I do not think we have a robust system for supporting students. Not for lack of trying. A lot of great people are doing the best they can, but we don't have enough people in place working directly with students. You've heard me say that before. And I'm still not clear tonight whether we'll be hiring more classroom teachers or not, but you don't need to answer that right now. It's pretty late, so I'm trying to put words together. The emphasis must be on directly supporting students. Thank you very much.
Maura?
Hi, thanks, everyone. I was able to go at the very tail end of the meeting in Bristol yesterday, and I really appreciated the opportunity to be there. And I kind of chafed a little bit about some of the comments of lack of turnout, and it's hard for people to come to a meeting at 7 o'clock at night. You have to find a babysitter and all that kind of thing. So I'm remembering a time when the community engagement committee of this board had community members who went out, and I was one of them. And I think it was around developing the strategic plan in 2019, and we each interviewed various members of the community. So we were sort of deputized to do that, if you will. And I think it would be incumbent on the board, and particularly I would imagine the community engagement committee, to do more to reach out to the community in addition to inviting the community in, because not everybody can accept that invitation. But I know many more people are concerned about this issue. I see on the calendar that the community engagement committee is next meeting. It looks like on June 11th. So I don't know if this is something that they can take up there, but I would strongly recommend that the board, and particularly that committee, really work towards pushing out into the community to get feedback. Because I think we might hear some different things or hear more of the same things be re-emphasized, but just have a larger pool to draw from. Thanks.
Teresa?
Can you hear me?
And
I think what I'd like to say is I fall into the category of a person that, yes, I don't want to see my taxes go skyrocket, but I want, more important to me is the boots on the ground, the people who have direct contact with the children. And I don't understand the disconnect between the teachers and the administration. And granted, I'm not involved, I'm not an educator, but on the outside looking in, I've been to many meetings where a teacher has stood up and has asked to be part of the discussion, to try and look for solutions. And they continue to ask, and I don't know if they're not answered or what is the problem, but they continue to ask, which leads me to believe they must not be getting brought to the table to talk about things, or they wouldn't continue to keep asking. If teachers are saying that coaches, the model isn't working, why isn't the administration looking at that? These people don't have direct contact with kids. So why are we continuing to have the coaches when we know that that line item alone is 800 and something thousand? It blows my mind that there's no data that we can show that these coaches have direct influence on student outcomes, and yet we keep the positions, and we have people that with direct contact with kids. You want to eliminate those positions. It doesn't work that way. And I look forward to continuing forward. I want to be able to vote yes. And I look forward to continuing this dialogue, because something has to change in the dynamic, whether it's a policy, whatever it is, it's got to change so that the board is driving the bus. I know we have to trust our administration, but right now there's not trust there. I mean, I hate to say it, but there isn't. So, you really need to look at those coaching positions. If they don't have direct contact with kids, we don't have a district with funds that can go everywhere. You've got to make the tough decisions to cut. And I just ask Patrick, because you're going to be making that decision, that you really look at that. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kelly from Bristol. So first I do want to say to all the board members who have taken what I am assuming is a tremendous amount of time in the last week to do the work you've done, thank you. Greatly appreciated from everybody in the community. With that said, I think that there is a very clear divide between board members as well as administrators, teachers, whatever we want to call them, in terms of who's getting it and who's not. And I have a philosophy of my own when it comes to this school district or any school district or teacher, educator, that when they show you they are unwilling to work with you, believe them. And the reason I say that is because you can be loud. You can advocate for your child. You can advocate for other children. You can come to every board meeting. You can speak every time. You can send private emails to board members for 8 years straight. You can lawyer up. You can lose your job over it. You can be threatened. You can be bullied, and you can still show up here. And it feels to me like that divide is showing me that there are some people I should just believe at this point. This is the where they stand. And then luckily, we do have board members that have the community, the teachers, the students, and our school's best interest in mind. That division is clear as day. And I feel like there is a lot of tonight felt like a sales pitch. It felt like, let me give you some of what the community's asked for and then try to default right back into where can we pull money from. One of the biggest ones would have been Patrick, when you said yet again that because the last time that the 575 was proposed, it was said that Beth was confident that Act 173 that we were thriving, I believe is what the words were. And that we were confident that we could take that. Act 173 is idea. And there's no way, if you speak to the parents, the children, the teachers, there is no way that we can say with any certainty at all that the children in our district with special needs and needed special services are thriving. It's a joke to even say. It's a slap in the face, quite frankly, is what it is. And at a certain point, I don't know what else we can say to people with it to get them to believe the board. And so at this point, I think that it just needs to be made immensely clear that there is no trust. There is none. There's a lot of board members have been talking tonight, like as if maybe there is trust and maybe we can focus on dollars and cents instead of allocations. And that is a no. It's clear by the majority of community members that if we are not focusing on allocations, this is voted no. Period, end of story. If we are not keeping student services, it's a no. And one more thing, because this is important. We were kind of like shooting down the idea of looking into grant, like where the grant money is allocated towards. And I would like that looked into, because if you look, and when we're talking about comparing with other districts, here's a great place to start, okay? So let's look at where IDEA and special education grants are going and how much is going into the pension of admins, teachers, whatever we're going to call them, in this meeting, but where is the allocation of pension for the people applying for the grants And where does that compare to other districts? So if you don't understand, I can send you an email to better help you understand. But at this point,
If you could just wrap up.
I think the board needs to fully understand that there is no trust and that the division is clear. Community members, thank you.
For our meeting preparation for next week, we sort of hinted at, but it's going to be a lot of talking about the adoption of fiscal year 25 budget, approving warnings, talking about flyers. We have an update for some things, and then our regular business meeting will be on the 28th. So at this point, if no one else has anything else about meeting preparation or review, just need a motion to adjourn.
Be able to do the survey?
No, we'll save that for just the regular business.
I move to adjourn.
Kathy? A second? Barb, second. All those in favor of adjourning at 10:40 PM, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That is adjourned.